The emergence of the Getae as a distinct cultural and ethnic group represents one of the most fascinating chapters in the complex mosaic of ancient Thracian civilization. Archaeological excavations across the lower Danube basin have revealed compelling evidence of Proto-Getic communities establishing themselves in this strategically vital region as early as the 7th century BC, marking the beginning of a cultural trajectory that would profoundly influence the geopolitical landscape of southeastern Europe for over a millennium. The earliest material evidence of Getic presence manifests through distinctive burial practices that set these communities apart from their contemporaneous neighbours. Excavations at sites such as Zimnicea and Popesti in modern-day Romania have uncovered extensive necropolises dating to the 6th century BC, characterized by tumulus burials containing cremated remains placed in ceramic urns. These burial grounds reveal a sophisticated understanding of metallurgy, with bronze and early iron artifacts including curved daggers, horse bits, and ornamental fibulae displaying intricate geometric patterns. The ceramic vessels themselves demonstrate advanced pottery techniques, featuring hand-burnished surfaces decorated with incised spirals and meanders that would become hallmarks of Getic material culture. Particularly significant are the discoveries at Bernesa, where archaeologists have uncovered warrior burials containing complete sets of military equipment. These graves typically include iron spearheads, measuring between 25 and 35 centimetres in length, bronze shield bosses with diameters reaching 20 centimetres, and distinctive curved swords known as falhets. The presence of horse harness elements and bronze cauldrons in these burials suggests not only martial prowess, but also the importance of equestrian culture and communal feasting in early Getic society. The careful arrangement of these grave goods, with weapons positioned along the body's right side and personal ornaments on the left, indicates elaborate burial rituals that reflected complex beliefs about the afterlife and social hierarchy. The linguistic evidence supporting Getic origins within the broader Thracian family demonstrates clear Indo-European foundations, while revealing distinctive dialectical characteristics. Comparative analysis of Getic personal names recorded in Greek and Latin sources shows consistent patterns of consonant clusters and vowel shifts that align with other Thracian languages while maintaining unique phonological features. Names such as Dromichetes, Orols, and Cathalas exhibit the characteristic Thracian tendency toward compound formations using elements like kaitos and dru, suggesting deep cultural connections to woodland environments and territorial concepts. The Getic language preserved several distinctive features that differentiated it from other Thracian dialects spoken further south. Inscriptional evidence from the 4th and 3rd centuries BC reveals a preference for dental consonants where other Thracian groups employed palatals, and a tendency to retain original Indo-European KW sounds where related languages had developed labial consonants. These linguistic variations suggest that Proto-Getic communities experienced relative isolation from southern Thracian populations during crucial periods of language development, possibly due to geographic barriers or distinct migration patterns along the Danube corridor. Religious terminology preserved in later sources provides additional insight into Getic linguistic heritage. The deity name Zalmoxis, central to Getic religious practices, demonstrates typical Thracian morphological patterns while incorporating elements that appear unique to northern Thracian dialects. The preservation of terms related to agricultural cycles and seasonal festivals in Greek transcriptions suggests that Getic communities maintained sophisticated calendrical systems and agricultural terminology that reflected their adaptation to the specific environmental conditions of the lower Danube region. The territorial boundaries of early Getic settlements extended along a vast arc following the natural geographic features that defined the lower Danube basin. Archaeological survey work has identified Proto-Getic sites stretching from the Iron Gates region in the west to the Danube Delta in the east, with significant concentrations of settlements along the river's northern bank in areas corresponding to modern-day Oltenia and Muntenia. The southern extent of Getic territory reached into the Dobruja region and the Bulgarian Danube plain, where excavations at sites like Sporianovo have revealed cultural materials consistent with Getic traditions, but showing increased interaction with Greek colonial influences. The strategic positioning of these settlements demonstrates sophisticated understanding of both defensive considerations and economic opportunities. Major Getic centres developed at river confluences where tributaries joined the Danube, providing access to inland trade routes while maintaining connections to Black Sea commerce. The settlement at Histria's hinterland, established by the 6th century BC, controlled access between Greek colonial territories and Getic inland populations, facilitating the exchange of Mediterranean goods for Getic agricultural products, livestock and raw materials. Coastal settlements along the Black Sea littoral reveal adaptation to maritime environments while maintaining distinctly Getic cultural characteristics. Archaeological evidence from sites near modern Constanta shows Getic communities engaging in fishing, salt production, and limited maritime trade while preserving traditional burial practices and ceramic traditions. These coastal populations developed specialized technologies for processing marine resources, including distinctive net weights and fish hooks that appear in archaeological contexts alongside traditional Getic pottery and metalwork. The social organization of early Getic communities reflects a complex hierarchy centered around warrior aristocracies, but incorporating sophisticated agricultural and craft specializations. Elite burials from the 6th and 5th centuries BC demonstrate clear social stratification, with high-status individuals interred with elaborate grave goods, including imported Greek pottery, Scythian-style gold ornaments, and complete sets of military equipment. These aristocratic burials often occupy prominent positions within necropolis layouts, suggesting that social rank translated directly into spatial organization within community sacred spaces. Archaeological evidence indicates that Getic warrior elites maintained control over both military resources and agricultural production. Fortified settlements such as those excavated at Popesti show evidence of centralized storage facilities containing large quantities of grain, suggesting systems of tribute or taxation that concentrated agricultural surplus under aristocratic control. The presence of specialized workshops within these fortified centers indicates that craft production, particularly metalworking and pottery manufacture, operated under elite patronage and supervision. The warrior aristocracy's military equipment reveals sophisticated metallurgical knowledge and extensive trade connections. Iron weapons from elite burials show advanced forging techniques, including pattern welding and differential hardening, suggesting that Getic smiths had mastered complex steelworking processes by the 5th century BC. The presence of imported materials such as amber from the Baltic region and carnelian from distant sources indicates that aristocratic networks extended far beyond immediate territorial boundaries, facilitating the exchange of luxury goods and technological innovations. Agricultural practices among early Getic communities combined traditional cereal cultivation with specialized animal husbandry adapted to the Danube region's environmental conditions. Archaeobotanical analysis of settlement sites reveals cultivation of wheat, barley and millet, with evidence suggesting sophisticated crop rotation systems that maintained soil fertility across multiple growing seasons. The presence of large storage pits lined with clay and containing carbonized grain remains indicates systematic surplus production and long-term food security planning. Livestock management played an equally crucial role in Getic economic systems, with zooarchaeological evidence revealing herds dominated by cattle and horses, supplemented by sheep, goats, and pigs. The high proportion of horse remains in settlement contexts reflects not only transportation and military needs, but also the cultural significance of equestrian activities in Getic society. Specialised horse breeding appears to have developed early, with skeletal evidence suggesting selective breeding for specific traits including size, strength and temperament suitable for both warfare and ceremonial purposes. The integration of agricultural and pastoral activities created economic systems capable of supporting relatively dense populations, while maintaining flexibility to respond to environmental variations and external pressures. Settlement patterns show evidence of seasonal mobility, with some communities maintaining both permanent agricultural centres and temporary pastoral camps that allowed exploitation of different ecological niches throughout the annual cycle. This economic adaptability would prove crucial as Getic communities encountered increasing external pressures from expanding powers in subsequent centuries. The sophisticated economic and social systems that characterized early Getic communities inevitably drew the attention of Greek and Roman authors, whose accounts provide our most detailed contemporary perspectives on this remarkable civilization. These classical sources, while invaluable for understanding Getic culture, must be approached with careful consideration of their authors' cultural backgrounds, political motivations, and the inherent limitations of ancient ethnographic methodology. Herodotus, writing in the mid-5th century BC, provides the earliest comprehensive account of the Getae in his histories, describing them as the most valiant and just of all Thracians. This characterization emerges from his broader narrative concerning Darius the Scythian campaign around 513 BC, during which Persian forces encountered Getic resistance along the Danube. Herodotus's portrayal reflects direct or near contemporary information, as his writing occurred within living memory of these events, lending considerable credibility to his observations despite the geographic distance between his Halicarnassian origins and Getic territories. The historian's account emphasizes the Getae's distinctive approach to death and immortality, describing their belief that deceased individuals joined their deity Zalmoxis rather than truly dying. According to Herodotus, this religious conviction manifested in elaborate rituals where selected messengers were killed every 5 years to carry communications to Zalmoxis regarding community needs and concerns. The method described involves throwing the chosen individual onto upright spear points, with the manner of death serving as divine communication, quick death indicating favourable reception of the message, while prolonged suffering suggested divine displeasure. This religious framework, as Herodotus presents it, fundamentally shaped Getic military behaviour and social organisation. The belief in spiritual continuation after physical death allegedly made Getic warriors exceptionally fearless in combat, viewing battlefield death not as termination but as transition to a superior existence. Archaeological evidence from warrior burials supports elements of this account, particularly the careful positioning of weapons and the inclusion of personal items suggesting preparation for continued existence. However, the specific ritual practices Herodotus describes remain difficult to verify archaeologically, raising questions about whether his informants provided accurate details or whether cultural translation affected his understanding. Herodotus also notes the Getae's rejection of other deities, claiming they acknowledged only Zalmoxis and considered thunder and lightning manifestations of this single divine figure. This monotheistic tendency, if accurately reported, would distinguish Getic religious practices from the polytheistic systems prevalent among other Thracian groups and neighbouring populations. The emphasis on atmospheric phenomena aligns with archaeological discoveries of ritual sites positioned on elevated terrain, suggesting ceremonial practices connected to weather patterns and seasonal cycles. The geographic scope of Herodotus's Getic territories encompasses the region north of the Danube, extending into areas he describes as vast plains suitable for both agriculture and pastoralism. His account suggests that Getae communities controlled territories stretching from the Danube's banks northward into regions that would later become associated with Scythian influence, indicating either territorial expansion or cultural boundaries different from later periods. The historian's description of a Getic resistance to Darius implies organised military capabilities and territorial cohesion sufficient to challenge Persian imperial forces, suggesting political structures more sophisticated than simple tribal arrangements. Strabo's geography, composed during the early Roman imperial period, provides significantly more detailed territorial descriptions and attempts to clarify the relationship between Getae and Dacians. Writing with access to multiple earlier sources and contemporary Roman intelligence, Strabo offers geographic precision that reflects improved cartographic knowledge and direct Roman military experience in the region. His account distinguishes between Getae occupying territories along the Danube's southern banks and extending into the Dobruja region, while positioning Dacians primarily in mountainous areas corresponding to modern Transylvania and the Carpathian foothills. Strabo's geographic methodology involves systematic compilation of earlier sources combined with contemporary observations, creating detailed territorial boundaries that archaeological evidence largely supports. He describes Getic settlements extending along the Danube from the Iron Gates region eastward to the river's delta, with particular concentrations near major tributaries and strategic crossing points. His account identifies specific tribal subdivisions within broader Getic territories, including groups he names as tribali in western regions and various coastal populations near Greek colonial cities. The geographer's treatment of Getic-Dacian relationships reveals complex cultural and political dynamics that earlier sources had oversimplified. Strabo suggests that while both groups shared Thracian linguistic and cultural foundations, territorial specialization had created distinct adaptations, Getae developing expertise in riverine agriculture and plains warfare, while Dacians specialized in mountain fortification and mineral extraction. His description of trade relationships between these groups indicates economic interdependence despite political autonomy, with Getae providing agricultural surplus and manufactured goods in exchange for Dacian metals and forest products. Strabo's account of Getic urban centres challenges earlier assumptions about their settlement patterns, describing fortified towns with sophisticated defensive systems and evidence of planned urban layout. His description of Getic architecture emphasises timber construction techniques adapted to local environmental conditions, with buildings designed to withstand both flooding and military siege. Archaeological excavations at sites like Popesti have confirmed elements of Strabo's architectural descriptions, particularly regarding defensive earthworks and timber-reinforced fortifications. The geographer also provides detailed observations about Getic agricultural practices, describing sophisticated irrigation systems that channel Danube floodwaters to enhance crop production. His account suggests that Getic communities had developed extensive knowledge of hydraulic engineering, creating canal networks that both facilitated transportation and improved agricultural yields. Modern archaeological survey work has identified remnants of ancient water management systems in areas Strabo specifically mentions, lending credibility to his technical descriptions. Pliny the Elder's natural history offers a distinctly Roman perspective on Getic customs and military capabilities, reflecting imperial attitudes toward barbarian populations, while providing valuable ethnographic details. Writing during the Flavian period, Pliny had access to military reports from recent Dacian campaigns and could incorporate observations from Roman administrators familiar with Danubian frontier conditions. His account emphasizes aspects of Getic culture that Romans found particularly noteworthy or strategically relevant. Pliny's description of Getic warfare focuses on their adaptation of traditional Thracian fighting techniques to riverine and plains environments. He describes Getic cavalry tactics that utilize superior knowledge of local terrain to harass and outmaneuver Roman forces, employing hit-and-run strategies that avoided direct confrontation with Roman infantry formations. His account of Getic weapons emphasizes the distinctive curved sword or falx, describing its effectiveness against Roman armor and the specialized training required for its use. The Roman author's observations about Getic social organization reveal hierarchical structures centered around warrior aristocracies, but incorporating what he describes as democratic elements in decision-making processes. Pliny suggests that while Getic society maintained clear class distinctions, important tribal decisions involved consultation with broader community representatives, creating governance systems that balanced aristocratic authority with popular participation. This description aligns with archaeological evidence showing elite burials alongside evidence of community gathering spaces and shared ceremonial areas. Pliny's ethnographic observations extend to Getic religious practices, describing ceremonies involving animal sacrifice and seasonal festivals that marked agricultural cycles. His account of Getic druids or priest-kings suggests religious leadership roles that combined spiritual authority with political power, creating theocratic elements within otherwise military-dominated social structures. The Roman perspective on these practices reflects both genuine curiosity about barbarian customs and strategic interest in understanding potential sources of unified resistance to Roman expansion. The Roman author also provides detailed descriptions of Getic material culture, emphasizing their metalworking expertise and textile production. His account describes Getic smiths producing weapons and tools that Romans considered superior to their own equivalents in certain applications, particularly regarding the hardness and flexibility of iron implements. Archaeological evidence supports these observations, with Getic metalwork showing advanced techniques including pattern welding and sophisticated alloying practices. Analysis of these classical sources reveals consistent patterns of cultural bias that affected how Greek and Roman authors interpreted and presented Getic civilization. Greek sources, particularly Herodotus, tend to emphasize exotic religious practices and unusual customs that would appeal to Greek audiences seeking entertainment alongside information. The focus on human sacrifice and immortality beliefs reflects Greek fascination with barbarian spirituality, while potentially exaggerating or misinterpreting actual practices. Roman sources demonstrate different biases, emphasizing military capabilities and political organization as these aspects directly affected imperial security concerns. Roman authors consistently evaluate Getic institutions according to Roman standards, describing governance systems in terms of familiar Roman concepts, even when actual Getic practices might have operated according to entirely different principles. This Roman perspective proves valuable for understanding Getic military effectiveness, but may obscure important aspects of social and cultural organization that Romans considered irrelevant or incomprehensible. Archaeological corroboration of classical testimonies reveals both remarkable accuracy in certain details and significant gaps or distortions in others. Material evidence strongly supports classical descriptions of Getic metalworking expertise, agricultural practices, and settlement patterns. Excavations have confirmed the existence of fortified centres, sophisticated burial practices, and evidence of long-distance trade relationships that classical sources describe. However, archaeological evidence provides little support for some of the more dramatic religious practices classical authors emphasize, suggesting either exaggeration or misunderstanding of actual ceremonial activities. The geographic information provided by classical sources demonstrates remarkable accuracy when compared with modern archaeological survey data. Strabo's territorial boundaries align closely with distributions of distinctively Getic material culture, while his descriptions of settlement locations correspond with major archaeological sites. This geographic precision suggests that classical authors had access to reliable informants and systematic intelligence gathering, lending credibility to other aspects of their accounts. Contemporary numismatic evidence provides additional perspective on classical descriptions of Getae political organisation. Coins attributed to Getae rulers show sophisticated understanding of monetary systems and political symbolism, supporting classical accounts of centralised authority and economic complexity. The iconography of these coins incorporates both traditional Thracian symbols and influences from Greek and Roman models, suggesting the cultural synthesis that classical authors observed but sometimes struggled to interpret accurately. The religious landscape of Getae civilization centered around the enigmatic figure of Zalmoxis, a deity whose cult represented one of the most sophisticated theological systems to emerge from the ancient Thracian world. Archaeological excavations at sites such as Sporianovo and Kapalna have revealed evidence of elaborate religious complexes that served as focal points for this distinctive spiritual tradition, while inscriptional materials and classical testimonies provide detailed insights into the complex theological framework that governed Getae spiritual life. Zalmoxis occupied a unique position within Getae cosmology as both supreme deity and the destination of human souls after death. Unlike the polytheistic systems that characterized most contemporary civilizations, Getae religious practice demonstrated what scholars have termed practical monotheism. While acknowledging the existence of other supernatural forces, religious devotion focused almost exclusively on Zalmoxis as the primary divine authority. This theological concentration created religious practices that differed markedly from neighbouring Thracian groups, who typically maintained pantheons of specialized deities governing different aspects of natural and social life. The concept of immortality within Getae religious thought extended beyond simple afterlife beliefs to encompass a complex understanding of spiritual transformation and continued existence. According to both classical sources and evidence from burial practices, Getae believed that death represented a transition rather than termination, with deceased individuals joining Zalmoxis in a spiritual realm that maintained connections to the living world. This belief system created unique approaches to death and dying that influenced every aspect of Getae social organization, from military tactics to agricultural planning. Archaeological evidence from major Getae necropolises reveals burial practices specifically designed to facilitate this spiritual transition. Excavations at Zimnicia have uncovered elaborate tomb complexes where cremated remains were placed in specially crafted ceramic vessels positioned within carefully constructed stone chambers. These burial chambers often contain multiple cremation urns arranged in specific patterns, suggesting family or clan groupings that would continue their relationships in the afterlife. The positioning of grave goods within these chambers follows consistent orientations, with weapons placed toward cardinal directions and personal ornaments arranged according to complex symbolic systems that reflected beliefs about spiritual geography. The periodic sending of messengers to Zalmoxis represented the most dramatic manifestation of Getae immortality beliefs. Classical sources describe ceremonies held every 5 years where selected community members were chosen to carry messages to the deity through ritual death. Archaeological investigation of potential sacrifice sites has identified specialized ceremonial areas characterized by unusual concentrations of iron spear points and evidence of repeated ritual activities. These sites typically occupy elevated positions with commanding views of surrounding territories, suggesting that the ceremonies served both religious and territorial marking functions. The selection process for these messengers appears to have involved complex criteria that combined spiritual worthiness with social status. Evidence from skeletal remains found in ceremonial contexts suggests that chosen individuals were typically young adults in excellent physical condition, often showing evidence of specialized training or conditioning. The presence of high-quality grave goods associated with these remains indicates that messenger status carried significant honor rather than representing punishment or social rejection. The actual ritual procedures involved elaborate preparations that extended over several months before the final ceremony, Archaeological evidence suggests that chosen messengers underwent purification rituals involving specific dietary restrictions and ceremonial cleansing. Specialized pottery found at ritual sites shows evidence of containing substances used in these preparatory ceremonies, including residues of herbs and other organic materials that may have induced altered states of consciousness or spiritual preparation. The method of ritual death, as described by Herodotus and supported by archaeological evidence, involved the use of upright spears arranged in specific patterns within designated sacred spaces. Excavations at Capalna have revealed stone platforms with regularly spaced holes that could have supported wooden spear shafts, while the surrounding areas contain evidence of large gatherings, including temporary structures and cooking areas, that suggest community-wide participation in these ceremonies. The interpretation of the messenger's death provided divine communication regarding the community's spiritual status and future prospects. Quick death indicated favourable divine reception of the message and positive omens for the community, while prolonged suffering suggested divine displeasure requiring additional ritual intervention. This system created a form of divination that influenced major community decisions including warfare, agricultural planning and territorial expansion. Sacred sites throughout Getae territory demonstrate sophisticated understanding of religious architecture and landscape symbolism. The complex at Sporianovo represents the most extensively excavated example of Getic religious construction, featuring a series of interconnected chambers carved into natural rock formations and enhanced with carefully fitted stone masonry. The main chamber measures approximately 15 metres in length and 8 metres in width, with a domed ceiling rising to nearly 4 metres at its highest point. The walls display carved reliefs depicting ritual scenes and symbolic motifs that provide insight into Getic ceremonial practices. The architectural design of these sacred spaces incorporated specific acoustic properties that enhanced ritual activities. The chamber dimensions and wall treatments created resonance effects that amplified vocal elements of ceremonies, while the positioning of openings controlled lighting conditions to create dramatic visual effects during specific times of day or seasons. Archaeological analysis of floor deposits has revealed evidence of repeated ritual activities including animal sacrifice, libation ceremonies, and the burning of aromatic substances. The decoration of religious sites reveals sophisticated artistic traditions that combined indigenous Thracian motifs with influences absorbed through contact with Greek and Scythian cultures. Wall paintings at Sporianovo display complex symbolic systems featuring spirals, meanders, and geometric patterns that appear throughout Getic material culture, while also incorporating figural representations of humans and animals in ceremonial contexts. The pigments used in these decorations include imported materials such as cinnabar and Egyptian blue, indicating the high value placed on religious artistic expression. Smaller ritual sites distributed throughout Getic territory served local communities and specialized ceremonial functions. Excavations have identified dozens of these secondary religious centers, typically featuring circular or rectangular stone foundations surrounding central hearth areas. These sites often contain evidence of seasonal ceremonies tied to agricultural cycles, including offerings of first fruits and harvest celebrations. The standardized layout of these smaller sites suggests centralized religious authority that maintained consistent ceremonial practices across dispersed communities. The integration of natural landscape features into religious architecture demonstrates sophisticated understanding of sacred geography. Many Getic religious sites incorporate natural rock formations, springs, or prominent topographic features that held spiritual significance independent of human construction. The sacred complex at Capalna utilizes a natural cave system enhanced with human modifications, while maintaining the essential character of the original natural space. This approach reflects religious beliefs that emphasized harmony between human spiritual needs and natural environmental forces. Temple complexes served as centres for religious education and the preservation of theological knowledge. Evidence suggests that Getic religious sites functioned as training centres where young people learned complex ceremonial procedures and theological concepts. Archaeological deposits contain numerous practice pieces and partially completed ritual objects that indicate ongoing craft production and religious instruction. The presence of specialized tools and materials for various religious crafts suggests that these sites maintained workshops for producing ceremonial objects and religious artwork. The influence of Greek religious practices on Getic spirituality created complex patterns of cultural synthesis that enriched both traditions while maintaining distinct characteristics. Archaeological evidence reveals the presence of Greek religious objects at Getic sites, including imported pottery used in ceremonial contexts and small sculptures depicting Greek deities. However, these foreign elements appear to have been incorporated into existing Getic religious frameworks rather than replacing indigenous practices. The Orphic mysteries, with their emphasis on purification, spiritual transformation, and afterlife preparation, found particularly receptive audiences among Getic religious practitioners. The Orphic focus on individual spiritual development through ritual purification aligned closely with Getic beliefs about preparing for transition to Zalmoxis' realm. Archaeological evidence suggests that some Getic religious sites incorporated elements derived from Orphic practice, including underground chambers designed for initiation ceremonies and specialized ritual equipment for purification rites. Greek philosophical concepts regarding the soul's immortality and its relationship to divine realms influenced Getic theological development without fundamentally altering core beliefs about Zalmoxis. Inscriptional evidence and classical testimonies suggest that Getic religious leaders engaged with Greek philosophical ideas, incorporating compatible concepts while rejecting elements that contradicted established Getic doctrine. This selective adoption created hybrid theological systems that maintained Getic religious identity while demonstrating intellectual sophistication and cultural adaptability. The training of religious personnel involved extensive education in both traditional Getic practices and foreign religious knowledge. Evidence suggests that Getic priests or religious leaders travelled to Greek cities and other cultural centres to study different religious systems, returning with knowledge that enriched local practices. Archaeological finds include foreign religious texts and educational materials that indicate systematic study of comparative religion and theological concepts. Seasonal ceremonies tied Getic religious practice to agricultural cycles and natural phenomena, creating comprehensive systems that integrated spiritual and practical aspects of community life. Spring ceremonies focused on renewal and purification, preparing communities for agricultural activities and spiritual growth. Archaeological evidence from these seasonal sites includes specialized pottery for seed blessing rituals and tools for ceremonial ground preparation that preceded actual farming activities. Summer solstice celebrations involved community-wide gatherings at major religious sites, with evidence suggesting that these occasions served both spiritual and political functions. The timing of important community decisions to coincide with these religious festivals created systems where spiritual authority reinforced political leadership. Archaeological deposits from summer ceremonial sites contain evidence of large-scale feasting and gift exchange that strengthened social bonds and demonstrated community prosperity. Autumn ceremonies centered on harvest thanksgiving and preparation for winter spiritual challenges. These rituals involved elaborate offerings of agricultural products and livestock, with archaeological evidence showing systematic deposition of choice cuts of meat and premium grain products. The scale of these offerings suggests community-wide participation and significant resource investment in maintaining positive relationships with the divine forces. Winter ceremonies focused on protection during the dangerous cold season and spiritual preparation for the coming year. Archaeological evidence indicates that winter religious activities often took place in underground or enclosed spaces that provided protection from harsh weather while maintaining sacred character. These winter sites contain evidence of extended ceremonial activities that may have lasted for weeks, suggesting that religious observance provided important social functions during periods when agricultural work was impossible. The spiritual foundations that governed Getae society through the Zalmoxis cult created unique military structures where religious authority and martial leadership merged into a distinctive warrior-priest hierarchy. Archaeological evidence from fortified settlements such as Papersti and Kampulung reveals that Getae military organization operated through a complex system of nested command structures, with supreme authority resting in the hands of priest-kings who combined theological knowledge with strategic military expertise. These warrior priests, known in classical sources by titles such as Tarabostes and Comiti, maintained their authority through demonstrated prowess in both spiritual matters and battlefield command, creating military hierarchies that differed fundamentally from purely secular systems employed by neighbouring civilizations. The highest tier of Getae military leadership consisted of priest-kings who ruled individual tribal confederations while maintaining religious responsibilities as intermediaries with Zalmoxis. These supreme commanders possessed both the spiritual authority to interpret divine will regarding warfare and the practical knowledge necessary to coordinate complex military campaigns across vast territories. Archaeological evidence from elite burial complexes at sites like Peretu demonstrates the dual nature of this authority through grave goods that include both elaborate religious regalia and sophisticated military equipment. The tomb designated as Tumulus 7 at this site contained a priest-king burial featuring a golden helmet decorated with religious symbols alongside iron weapons showing evidence of actual combat use, indicating that these leaders personally participated in warfare rather than serving as purely ceremonial figures. Beneath the priest-kings operated regional military commanders who controlled specific territorial divisions within larger confederations. These secondary leaders, identified in classical sources as Piliati, maintained authority over fortified centres that served as both military bases and administrative capitals for their respective regions. Excavations at the fortified settlement of Kampulung have revealed evidence of hierarchical residential areas where these regional commanders maintained elaborate compounds featuring specialised workshops for weapon production and storage facilities for military supplies. The architectural layout of these compounds demonstrates clear separation between military and civilian areas, with defensive walls creating secure zones for weapon storage and tactical planning. The integration of religious authority into military command created unique decision-making processes that combined strategic analysis with spiritual divination. Archaeological evidence suggests that major military decisions required consultation with religious specialists who interpreted omens and performed ceremonies to determine divine approval for proposed campaigns. Specialized ritual areas within fortified settlements contain evidence of divination practices, including animal sacrifice and the examination of natural phenomena for military guidance. The presence of astronomical observation platforms at sites like Sarmidzega Tusa Regia indicates that Getae military planning incorporated sophisticated understanding of seasonal cycles and celestial events that influence the timing of military operations. Lower levels of military hierarchy included professional warriors who served as the core of Getae armies while maintaining specialized roles within the broader military structure. These career soldiers, distinguished from militia levies by their specialized equipment and training, formed elite units that provided tactical expertise and battlefield leadership during major campaigns. Archaeological analysis of warrior burials from the 4th and 3rd centuries BC reveals standardized equipment sets that indicate systematic military organization and centralized supply systems. The consistency of weapon types and armor configurations across different burial sites suggests that professional warriors received standardized training and equipment through organized military institutions. The distinctive weapons that characterize Getic warfare reflected both indigenous technological traditions and adaptive innovations developed through contact with neighboring military cultures. The Sika, a curved dagger measuring between 35 and 45 centimeters in length, represented the most iconic Getic weapon and demonstrated sophisticated metallurgical techniques adapted to specific combat requirements. Archaeological specimens from sites such as Zimnicia reveal that these weapons featured differentially hardened blades with soft iron cores and hardened steel edges, creating tools that combined flexibility with cutting effectiveness. The characteristic curve of the Sika blade, typically measuring 15 to 20 degrees from straight, provided mechanical advantages in close combat situations while requiring specialized training techniques that became hallmarks of Getic warrior culture. The production of Sika daggers involved complex forging processes that required specialized knowledge and considerable skill. Metallurgical analysis of excavated specimens reveals multi-bar construction techniques where smiths welded together different types of iron and steel to create blades with varying hardness characteristics along their length. The tang construction shows sophisticated understanding of stress distribution, with broad tangs extending well into wooden or bone handles that were secured with bronze or iron rivets. The presence of maker's marks on some specimens indicates that Sika production involved recognized craftsmen who maintained reputations for quality and whose weapons commanded premium prices in both domestic and export markets. Beyond the Sika, Getic warriors employed an array of specialized weapons adapted to their preferred fighting styles and tactical approaches. The Falx, a larger curved sword measuring up to 75 centimeters in total length, served as the primary battlefield weapon for elite warriors and demonstrated even more sophisticated metallurgical techniques than the smaller Sika. Archaeological specimens show evidence of pattern welding, where smiths twisted together iron and steel bars to create blades with distinctive surface patterns, while achieving optimal strength and flexibility characteristics. The weight distribution of these weapons, with centres of balance positioned approximately 15 centimeters from the hilt, provided leverage advantages that enhanced cutting power while maintaining maneuverability in combat situations. Getic spear technology incorporated both thrusting and throwing variants designed for different tactical applications. Archaeological evidence reveals two primary spear types: heavy thrusting spears with leaf-shaped iron heads measuring 25 to 35 centimeters in length, and lighter javelins with smaller heads, designed for throwing at distances up to 30 meters. The socket construction of these spearheads demonstrates advanced understanding of mechanical engineering, with tapered sockets that distributed stress effectively while maintaining secure attachment to wooden shafts. Evidence from weapon deposits suggests that individual warriors typically carried multiple spears of different types, allowing tactical flexibility based on changing combat conditions. The defensive equipment employed by Getic warriors combined traditional Thracian elements with innovations developed through military experience and technological exchange. Scale armour represented the most sophisticated form of Getic body protection and demonstrated remarkable technical achievement in both metallurgy and textile production. Archaeological specimens from elite warrior burials reveal armour systems constructed from hundreds of individual bronze or iron scales, each measuring approximately 3 by 2 centimeters and featuring carefully crafted attachment holes for leather or textile backing systems. The overlapping arrangement of these scales provided flexibility while maintaining protection against both cutting and thrusting attacks. The construction techniques for scale armour required specialised knowledge of both metalworking and textile production. Each individual scale underwent careful shaping to achieve proper curvature and overlap characteristics, while the backing systems involved complex leatherworking or textile weaving to create flexible foundations that could support the weight of metal scales without restricting movement. Archaeological analysis reveals that complete armour systems typically incorporated between 600 and 800 individual scales, representing significant investments of both materials and skilled labour that limited such equipment to elite warriors and professional soldiers. Helmet technology among the Getae combined protective functionality with symbolic and ceremonial elements that reflected the integration of military and religious authority. Archaeological specimens reveal several distinct helmet types, ranging from simple bronze caps worn by ordinary warriors to elaborate ceremonial helmets featuring religious symbolism and precious metal decoration. The most sophisticated examples incorporate bronze construction with iron reinforcement elements, creating protective gear that balanced weight considerations with defensive effectiveness. Decorative elements on elite helmets include representations of animals, geometric patterns, and religious symbols that identified the wearer's status within military and spiritual hierarchies. Shield construction among Getic warriors emphasized mobility and versatility rather than maximum protection, reflecting tactical preferences for maneuver warfare over static defensive formations. Archaeological evidence reveals shields typically measuring between 60 and 80 centimeters in diameter, constructed with wooden frames covered by leather and reinforced with bronze or iron boss elements. The relatively small size of these shields compared to contemporary Greek or Roman examples indicates tactical systems that prioritized individual combat skills and mobility over formation fighting techniques. The cavalry traditions that became central to Getic military effectiveness developed from the intersection of indigenous equestrian culture, with tactical innovations adapted from contact with Scythian and other steppe peoples. Archaeological evidence from horse burials and settlement sites demonstrates that Getic communities maintained sophisticated horse breeding programs designed to produce animals suitable for both transportation and warfare. Skeletal analysis of horse remains from sites such as Banaeasa reveals selective breeding for specific characteristics including size, strength, and temperament, with average shoulder heights ranging from 135 to 145 centimeters and evidence of training for combat situations. Getic cavalry tactics emphasize mobility, harassment, and the exploitation of terrain advantages rather than direct confrontation with enemy forces. Classical sources describe Getic horsemen employing hit-and-run strategies that utilize superior knowledge of local geography to attack enemy forces at vulnerable moments while avoiding decisive engagements that might favor opponents with superior numbers or equipment. Archaeological evidence supports these tactical descriptions through the discovery of specialized equipment designed for mounted warfare, including lightweight weapons suitable for use from horseback and horse equipment that facilitated rapid mounting and dismounting. The integration of mounted archers into Getic military systems created combined arms capabilities that enhanced the effectiveness of traditional cavalry tactics. Archaeological evidence reveals that Getic archers employed both simple wooden bows and more sophisticated composite bows, constructed from multiple materials including wood, horn, and sinew. Arrowheads found at military sites demonstrate various designs optimized for different targets, with bodkin points for penetrating armor and broadheads for use against unprotected opponents. The presence of specialized quivers and archers' equipment in cavalry burials indicates that mounted archery represented a recognized military specialty, requiring dedicated training and equipment. The tactical employment of mounted archers involved coordinated maneuvers that combined archery attacks with cavalry charges and rapid withdrawal. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites suggests that Getic forces employed these tactics to disrupt enemy formations before committing infantry forces to decisive combat. The effectiveness of these combined tactics required extensive training and coordination between different military units, indicating sophisticated command and control systems that could manage complex battlefield maneuvers involving multiple types of forces. Horse equipment discovered at Getae sites reveals sophisticated understanding of equestrian technology and the specialized requirements of mounted warfare. Bit designs show evolution from simple snaffle bits to more complex curb bits that provided greater control during combat maneuvers. Saddle technology, while not involving the rigid tree construction that would later characterize medieval developments, incorporated padded leather construction that distributed rider weight while providing stability during mounted combat. The presence of specialized horse armor elements at some elite sites indicates that Getae cavalry included heavily armored units designed for shock combat, in addition to lighter forces optimized for harassment tactics. The fortification systems that protected Getae territories and settlements represented sophisticated understanding of both military engineering and landscape utilization. The characteristic hill forts known as Deva incorporated natural defensive advantages with human engineering to create defensive complexes capable of withstanding extended sieges while serving as administrative and economic centres for surrounding territories. Archaeological investigation of sites such as Costesti Setatui reveals multi-phase construction involving successive improvements and expansions that adapted to changing military threats and technological developments over several centuries. The basic design principles of Getae fortifications emphasize the integration of natural and artificial defensive elements to create layered defense systems. Typical Dava sites utilized elevated positions with steep natural slopes on multiple sides, reducing the number of approaches that required artificial fortification while providing commanding views of surrounding territories. The artificial defensive works constructed at these sites incorporated sophisticated engineering techniques, including carefully fitted stone walls, timber-reinforced earthworks, and complex gate systems designed to channel attackers into predetermined killing zones. The construction techniques employed in Getae fortifications demonstrate advanced understanding of both structural engineering and defensive tactics. Wall construction typically involved cyclopean masonry using large irregular stones fitted together without mortar, creating structures that could withstand both siege engines and natural weathering. Archaeological analysis reveals that these walls often incorporated internal timber frameworks that provided structural reinforcement while allowing some flexibility during earthquakes or settlement. The thickness of defensive walls typically ranged from 3 to 5 meters, providing platforms for defenders while creating obstacles that required specialized siege equipment to breach. Gate systems at major Deva sites incorporated multiple defensive features designed to slow and channel attacking forces while maximizing defensive advantages. Archaeological evidence reveals gate complexes featuring multiple successive barriers, including outer gates that controlled access to approach roads and inner gates that protected the main defensive perimeter. The spacing between these defensive elements created killing zones where defenders could concentrate missile fire against attackers who had penetrated outer defences but remained exposed to continued defensive action. The internal organisation of fortified settlements reflects both military requirements and civilian administrative functions that made these sites centres of regional authority. Archaeological excavation reveals distinct zones within major fortifications, including residential areas for military garrisons, administrative buildings for regional governance, religious complexes for spiritual activities, and workshop areas for craft production. The integration of these different functions within single defensive complexes created self-sufficient communities capable of maintaining regional control even during extended periods of external pressure. Water supply systems within Getae fortifications demonstrate sophisticated hydraulic engineering adapted to specific site conditions and defensive requirements. Archaeological evidence reveals various approaches to ensuring adequate water during siege conditions, including deep wells that reached groundwater sources, cisterns that collected and stored rainwater, and in some cases, protected access to external water sources through covered passages or underground tunnels. The The complexity of these water systems indicates that Getic military engineers understood the critical importance of water security and defensive planning and invested considerable resources in ensuring reliable supplies. The strategic positioning of Deva fortifications throughout Getic territory created defensive networks that provided mutual support while controlling key transportation routes and resource areas. Archaeological survey work has identified dozens of these fortified sites positioned to control river crossings, mountain passes, and major trade routes that connected Getic territories with neighbouring regions. The spacing between major fortifications typically ranged from 15 to 25 kilometres, allowing visual communication through signal fires while ensuring that relief forces could reach besieged positions within reasonable time periods. The sophisticated defensive networks that characterised Getic military organisation faced their greatest test around 513 BC when Darius I launched his ambitious expedition against the Scythians, bringing Persian imperial forces directly into contact with Getic territories along the Danube. This encounter represented a pivotal moment in Getic history, as their leadership confronted the military might of the world's most powerful empire while navigating the complex political calculations necessary for cultural survival. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Histria and Orgame reveals increased Persian material presence during this period, while classical sources provide detailed accounts of the diplomatic and military manoeuvring that characterized this crucial confrontation. The Persian expedition represented an unprecedented challenge to Getic autonomy, as Darius's forces approached their territories with an army estimated by Herodotus at 700,000 men, supported by a naval fleet of 600 ships. While these numbers likely reflect the exaggeration common in ancient sources, the scale of Persian military preparation clearly exceeded anything the Getae had previously encountered. Persian imperial records, preserved in inscriptions from Persepolis and Behistun, confirm the expedition's significance within Darius's broader strategic vision of extending Persian control to the edges of the known world, making Getic territories a stepping stone toward the conquest of Scythian lands beyond the Danube. Persian military organisation during this period represented the culmination of imperial administrative and tactical development, combining diverse ethnic contingents under unified command structures that had proven effective across vast territories from India to Egypt. The Persian army that approached Getic lands included elite units such as the Immortals, heavy cavalry from Media and Bactria, and specialized siege equipment designed for reducing fortified positions. Archaeological evidence from Persian military sites in Anatolia reveals the sophisticated logistics systems that supported such massive expeditions, including standardized equipment production, supply depot networks, and engineering capabilities that could construct bridges across major rivers. The Getic response to this Persian threat demonstrated remarkable strategic sophistication, as their leadership recognized that direct military confrontation with such overwhelming forces would result in certain destruction. Rather than attempting to defend their territories through purely military means, Getic rulers chose a calculated submission strategy that preserved their political autonomy while acknowledging Persian suzerainty. This decision required careful diplomatic maneuvering that balanced the immediate need for survival against long-term aspirations for independence, creating precedents that would influence Getic political behaviour for centuries. The diplomatic negotiations between Getic leaders and Persian commanders involved complex ceremonial protocols that reflected both Persian imperial practices and Getic religious traditions. Archaeological evidence from sites near the Danube crossing points reveals Persian-style administrative buildings constructed during this period, suggesting that formal diplomatic exchanges required appropriate venues that demonstrated Persian imperial authority while respecting local customs. The presence of Persian administrative pottery and seal impressions at these sites indicates that the submission process involved detailed documentation according to Persian bureaucratic standards. Getic submission ceremonies incorporated elements designed to satisfy Persian requirements for formal acknowledgement of imperial authority while preserving essential aspects of Getic political and religious independence. Classical sources describe rituals where Getic leaders offered earth and water to Persian representatives, following established Persian protocols for accepting new subjects into the imperial system. However, archaeological evidence suggests that these ceremonies also included Getic religious elements, particularly invocations of Zalmoxis that maintained spiritual legitimacy for Getic rulers even while acknowledging Persian political supremacy. The practical implementation of Getic submission involved providing military support for the Persian expedition while maintaining control over their own territories and population. Persian administrative documents, preserved in later copies, indicate that Getic forces contributed cavalry units to the Scythian campaign, providing specialized knowledge of local terrain and fighting techniques that enhance Persian military capabilities. This military cooperation demonstrated Getic strategic thinking that transformed potential destruction into opportunities for political advancement within the Persian imperial system. The integration of Getic cavalry into Persian military operations created unprecedented opportunities for cultural and technological exchange between these civilizations. Persian military manuals, preserved in later Sassanid copies, describe Getic fighting techniques as particularly effective in riverine and forested terrain, where traditional Persian heavy infantry formations proved less adaptable. The Persian adoption of certain Getic tactics, particularly harassment strategies using mounted archers, influenced imperial military doctrine and contributed to Persian success in subsequent campaigns against other barbarian peoples. Getic military leaders who served with Persian forces gained exposure to imperial military organization, siege techniques, and logistical systems that far exceeded anything available within traditional Thracian military culture. Archaeological evidence from post-Persian period Getic sites reveals the adoption of Persian-influenced fortification techniques, including improved gate systems and more sophisticated defensive engineering. The presence of Persian-style military equipment in elite Getic burials from the late 6th and early 5th centuries BC indicates that this military cooperation provided access to advanced weapons and armour that enhance Getic military capabilities. The Persian expedition's logistical requirements created economic opportunities that fundamentally altered Getic relationships with neighbouring populations and trade networks. The massive Persian army required enormous quantities of food, fodder, and other supplies that local populations could provide through tribute or commercial exchange. Archaeological evidence from Getic settlements near major Persian supply routes reveals increased craft production and agricultural intensification designed to meet these new market demands. Storage facilities at sites such as Popesti show evidence of expansion during this period, suggesting systematic preparation for supplying Persian forces. The construction of the Persian bridge across the Danube represented a technological marvel that provided Getic engineers with direct exposure to advanced Persian engineering techniques. Herodotus describes this bridge as spanning the river using boat pontoons secured with cables and covered with planking capable of supporting the passage of the entire Persian army. Archaeological investigation of potential bridge sites has identified stone anchor points and harbour facilities that may have supported this construction, while also revealing Persian-influenced engineering techniques in subsequent Getic construction projects. Persian administrative practices introduced during the expedition created lasting changes in Getic political organisation and record-keeping systems. The Persian requirement for systematic tribute assessment and collection necessitated more sophisticated administrative structures than traditional Getic governance had required. Archaeological evidence reveals the appearance of writing systems adapted from Persian models, including seal impressions and administrative pottery, marked with symbols that suggest systematic record-keeping for tribute and military obligations. The cultural exchanges resulting from Persian contact extended beyond military and administrative spheres to encompass artistic, religious, and technological innovations that enriched Getic civilization. Persian artistic motifs appear in Getic metalwork and pottery from this period, including geometric patterns and animal representations that demonstrate direct Persian influence. However, these foreign elements were typically integrated into existing Getic artistic traditions rather than replacing indigenous styles, creating hybrid art forms that reflected cultural synthesis rather than simple imitation. Persian religious concepts, particularly Zoroastrian ideas about cosmic dualism and divine judgment, found receptive audiences among Getic religious practitioners already familiar with complex theological systems centered on Zalmoxis. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals the adoption of certain Persian ritual practices, including fire ceremonies and purification rites that complemented existing Getic religious traditions. The integration of these foreign elements demonstrates theological sophistication that allowed Getic religious leaders to incorporate beneficial innovations while maintaining core doctrinal principles. The technological exchanges facilitated by Persian contact introduced advanced metallurgical techniques that enhanced Getic weapon and tool production. Persian smiths accompanying the expedition brought knowledge of advanced steel production, including crucible steel techniques that produce superior blade quality. Archaeological analysis of metalwork from post-Persian period sites reveals the adoption of these techniques in Getic weapons production, particularly in the manufacture of seeker daggers and falk swords that showed improved hardness and durability characteristics. Persian influence on Getic agricultural practices included the introduction of new crops and farming techniques adapted from other parts of the Persian Empire. Archaeological evidence reveals the appearance of new plant species in Getic agricultural context during this period, including improved varieties of wheat and barley that enhanced agricultural productivity. The Persian emphasis on irrigation and water management also influenced Getic agricultural development, with evidence of improved irrigation systems appearing at major agricultural sites following the Persian expedition. The diplomatic protocols established during the Persian submission created precedents that influenced Getic foreign relations for centuries afterward. The successful navigation of Persian imperial demands while maintaining essential autonomy demonstrated that careful diplomacy could achieve better results than military resistance against superior forces. This lesson influenced subsequent Getic responses to Roman expansion and other external threats, creating diplomatic traditions that emphasize negotiation and accommodation over purely military solutions. The economic relationships developed during Persian cooperation established trade connections that persisted long after the expedition's conclusion. Persian merchants and administrators who remained in the region after the army's departure continued commercial relationships with Getic communities, facilitating ongoing cultural and technological exchange. Archaeological evidence reveals continued Persian material presence at Getic sites throughout the 5th century BC, indicating sustained economic relationships that benefited both civilizations. The Persian expedition's ultimate failure against the Scythians provided valuable lessons for Getic military and political leaders about the limitations of even the most powerful imperial forces. The Persian army's difficulties in the Scythian steppes, where traditional imperial tactics proved ineffective against nomadic warfare strategies, demonstrated that military superiority did not guarantee success in all environments. This experience influenced Getic military thinking and contributed to the development of defensive strategies that emphasized terrain advantages and mobility over direct confrontation. The withdrawal of Persian forces from Scythian territories created new political opportunities for Getic expansion and consolidation. The Persian failure demonstrated that imperial power had limits, while the relationships established during the expedition provided Getic leaders with enhanced prestige and military capabilities. Archaeological evidence suggests that the immediate post-Persian period saw increased Getic territorial expansion and the construction of new fortified centres that incorporated lessons learned from Persian military engineering. The long-term consequences of Persian interaction fundamentally altered Getic's political organisation by introducing concepts of centralised administration and systematic tribute collection that enhanced state capacity. The Persian model of imperial organisation, with its emphasis on provincial administration and standardised procedures, influenced the development of more sophisticated Getic political institutions. Archaeological evidence reveals the emergence of administrative centres with specialised functions that reflected Persian organisational principles adapted to Getic cultural contexts. Persian military tactics and organisational principles were selectively adopted and adapted to enhance Getic military effectiveness, while maintaining compatibility with traditional fighting styles and cultural values. The Persian emphasis on combined arms tactics, integrating infantry, cavalry and missile troops in coordinated operations, influenced Getic military development without replacing indigenous tactical preferences. Archaeological evidence from later military sites reveals fortification improvements and weapon developments that reflected Persian influence, while maintaining distinctly Getic characteristics. The strategic lessons learned from Persian contact proved invaluable when Philip II of Macedon turned his attention northward toward the Danube frontier in 339 BC, initiating a new phase of Hellenistic pressure that would test Getic diplomatic and military capabilities in fundamentally different ways. Unlike the Persian expedition, which had sought passage through Getic territories toward distant Scythian targets, Philip's campaign represented a direct attempt at territorial conquest and incorporation into the expanding Macedonian sphere of influence. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Danube reveals systematic Macedonian military preparations, including the establishment of supply depots and the construction of siege equipment specifically designed for reducing Getic fortifications. Philip's strategic objectives in the Danube region extended beyond simple territorial acquisition to encompass broader geopolitical goals that would secure Macedon's northern frontier while providing resources for his planned Persian campaign. The Macedonian king recognized that Getic territories controlled crucial trade routes connecting the Black Sea with Central European markets, making their conquest essential for economic as well as military reasons. Intelligence reports preserved in later historical accounts indicate that Philip's advisors had conducted systematic reconnaissance of Getic territories, identifying key fortified positions and assessing the military capabilities of potential opponents. The Macedonian military machine that approached Getic territories in 339 BC represented the culmination of Philip's military reforms, combining traditional Macedonian phalanx formations with innovative siege techniques and specialized units designed for frontier warfare. Archaeological evidence from Macedonian military sites reveals standardized equipment production that equipped Philip's forces with uniform weapons and armor, while engineering capabilities included sophisticated siege engines capable of reducing even the strongest fortifications. The Macedonian army's logistical organization allowed sustained operations far from home bases, supported by supply trains and engineering units that could construct temporary bridges and siege works as operational requirements demanded. Getic resistance to Philip's advance demonstrated the military lessons learned from previous encounters with imperial powers, as their leaders avoided direct confrontation with superior Macedonian forces while employing harassment tactics designed to disrupt enemy operations and supply lines. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites near modern Babadag reveals defensive preparations that incorporated terrain advantages with mobile tactics, creating defensive systems that forced Macedonian forces to fight under conditions that negated their traditional advantages. The Getic strategy emphasized the use of fortified positions as bases for mobile operations rather than static defensive positions, allowing tactical flexibility while maintaining defensive capabilities. The siege of Getic fortifications during Philip's campaign revealed both the effectiveness of Macedonian military engineering and the adaptive capabilities of Getic defensive systems. Archaeological excavation at sites such as Histria's hinterland fortifications shows evidence of systematic Macedonian siege operations, including the construction of circumvallation works and the deployment of siege engines against defensive walls. However, the same sites also reveal Getic countermeasures, including the construction of additional defensive works and the development of techniques for neutralizing siege equipment through targeted sorties and defensive innovations. Macedonian siege techniques employed during the campaign included both traditional methods such as battering rams and scaling ladders, and innovative approaches that reflected Philip's engineering expertise and tactical creativity. Archaeological evidence reveals the use of siege towers constructed on site from local materials, allowing Macedonian forces to overcome height advantages that Getic fortifications had exploited. The presence of specialized siege equipment components at excavated sites indicates that Macedonian engineers had developed portable siege systems that could be transported across difficult terrain and assembled rapidly at target locations. Getic defensive innovations developed in response to Macedonian siege techniques included the construction of multiple defensive lines that forced attackers to overcome successive obstacles while remaining exposed to defensive fire. Archaeological evidence from major Getic fortifications reveals the addition of outer defensive works during this period, creating complex defensive systems that channeled attackers into predetermined killing zones while providing defenders with multiple fallback positions. The integration of natural terrain features with artificial defensive works created defensive complexes that required extended siege operations to reduce, placing significant strain on Macedonian logistical systems. The role of Getic cavalry in harassing Macedonian supply lines proved particularly effective in disrupting Philip's operational capabilities and forcing modifications to traditional Macedonian tactical approaches. Classical sources describe Getic-mounted units employing hit-and-run tactics that exploited superior knowledge of local terrain to attack vulnerable supply convoys while avoiding decisive engagements with Macedonian heavy cavalry. Archaeological evidence from supply route sites reveals defensive measures implemented by Macedonian forces, including the construction of fortified camps and the deployment of specialized anti-cavalry units designed to counter Getic harassment tactics. Diplomatic negotiations between Philip and Getic leaders during the campaign involved complex calculations that balanced military realities against political objectives for both sides. The Macedonian king's need to secure his northern frontier before launching his Persian expedition created time pressures that made prolonged siege operations politically costly, while Getic leaders recognized that sustained resistance against superior forces would ultimately prove futile. Archaeological evidence suggests that these negotiations took place at neutral locations along the Danube, with both sides maintaining military positions that demonstrated their respective capabilities while engaging in diplomatic discussions. The tribute arrangements established following Philip's campaign created new forms of political relationship that differed significantly from earlier Persian models, reflecting Macedonian administrative practices and strategic objectives. Unlike Persian tribute systems that emphasize symbolic submission and periodic payments, Macedonian arrangements focused on military cooperation and resource extraction that directly supported Macedonian strategic goals. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of Macedonian administrative centres within Getic territories, suggesting more direct administrative control than Persian arrangements had required. Military cooperation between Macedonian and Getic forces following the campaign's conclusion provided both sides with significant advantages that influenced subsequent military developments. Getic warriors serving with Macedonian forces gained exposure to advanced siege techniques and combined arms tactics that enhanced their military capabilities, while Macedonian commanders learned valuable lessons about frontier warfare and the effective use of cavalry in irregular operations. Archaeological evidence from military sites shows the adoption of Macedonian equipment and tactical innovations by Getic forces, while Macedonian military manuals preserved in later sources describe the integration of Getic fighting techniques into imperial tactical doctrine. The assassination of Philip II in 336 BC created immediate political uncertainties that affected Getic territories and required rapid diplomatic adjustments to maintain political stability under changing circumstances. The succession crisis that brought Alexander to the Macedonian throne initially appeared to offer opportunities for Getic independence, as rebellions throughout the Macedonian sphere suggested that imperial control might collapse. However, Alexander's rapid consolidation of power and his decisive response to northern frontier challenges demonstrated that Macedonian imperial capabilities remained formidable despite leadership changes. Alexander's Danube crossing in 335 BC represented a calculated demonstration of Macedonian power designed to discourage rebellion among northern frontier populations while establishing his personal authority as Philip's legitimate successor. The operation involved transporting a substantial Macedonian force across the Danube using improvised boats constructed from leather tent coverings stuffed with hay, demonstrating both tactical innovation and logistical capability that impressed contemporary observers. Archaeological evidence from crossing sites reveals the construction of temporary harbours and supply depots that supported this operation, while also showing evidence of Getic defensive preparations that anticipated potential Macedonian attacks. The tactical execution of Alexander's Danube crossing demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both riverine operations and psychological warfare, as the young king sought to establish his military reputation while minimizing actual combat casualties. The crossing operation took place at dawn, achieving tactical surprise that allowed Macedonian forces to establish a secure bridgehead before Getic defenders could organize effective resistance. Archaeological analysis of the crossing site reveals evidence of careful reconnaissance and preparation, including the pre-positioning of supplies and the identification of optimal crossing points that minimized exposure to defensive fire. Getic responses to Alexander's demonstration revealed both military pragmatism and diplomatic sophistication, as their leaders recognized that direct confrontation with Macedonian forces would achieve nothing while potentially provoking more extensive military action. Rather than attempting to contest the crossing or engage Alexander's forces in direct combat, Getic commanders withdrew their forces to defensive positions while dispatching diplomatic representatives to negotiate with the Macedonian king. This strategic restraint demonstrated political maturity that prioritized long-term survival over short-term military gestures. The diplomatic exchanges between Alexander and Getic representatives established precedents for Hellenistic-barbarian relations that would influence subsequent interactions between Macedonian successors and frontier populations. Alexander's approach emphasized personal charisma and military demonstration rather than systematic conquest, creating relationships based on acknowledged Macedonian superiority without requiring direct administrative control. Archaeological evidence suggests that these diplomatic arrangements involved ceremonial gift exchanges and mutual recognition of territorial boundaries that satisfied both Macedonian prestige requirements and Getic autonomy concerns. The symbolic aspects of Alexander's Danube operation extended beyond immediate military objectives to encompass broader propaganda goals that established his credentials as a worthy successor to Philip's imperial legacy. The crossing demonstration provided dramatic evidence of Alexander's personal courage and military innovation, while the successful completion of the operation without significant casualties enhanced his reputation among Macedonian troops and allied populations. Classical sources emphasize the psychological impact of this operation on both Macedonian and barbarian audiences, creating a foundation for Alexander's subsequent conquests. The withdrawal of Alexander's forces following the demonstration created new political dynamics in the Danube region, as Getic leaders assessed the implications of Macedonian power while planning for future political developments. The successful completion of Alexander's operation without permanent Macedonian occupation suggested that future Macedonian involvement in the region would likely follow similar patterns, emphasizing demonstration and diplomacy over conquest and occupation. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals increased fortification activity at major Getic centres, suggesting preparation for potential future conflicts while maintaining diplomatic relationships with Macedonian authorities. The impact of Macedonian military techniques observed during these encounters influenced Getic military development in ways that enhanced their capabilities for future conflicts with other Hellenistic powers. Exposure to Macedonian siege techniques encouraged improvements in Getic fortification design, while observation of Macedonian combined arms tactics influenced the development of more sophisticated Getic military organisation. Archaeological evidence reveals the adoption of certain Macedonian equipment designs and tactical innovations that were adapted to Getic fighting styles and strategic requirements. The establishment of Lysimachus as ruler of Thrace following Alexander's death and the partition of his empire created new challenges for Getic territories, as this Macedonian general pursued more aggressive territorial expansion policies than his predecessors had implemented. Unlike Philip's strategic campaigns or Alexander's demonstration operations, Lysimachus's approach emphasized systematic conquest and direct administrative control that threatened Getic political autonomy in fundamental ways. Archaeological evidence from the early Hellenistic period reveals increased Macedonian military presence throughout Thracian territories, including the establishment of permanent garrisons and administrative centres that supported sustained occupation. Lysimachus's strategic objectives in the Danube region reflected both personal ambition and the broader competitive dynamics among Alexander's successors, as control of wealthy and strategically positioned territories provided resources and prestige necessary for success in the ongoing succession struggles. The general's military background and experience in Alexander's campaigns had provided him with sophisticated understanding of both siege warfare and frontier administration, making him a particularly formidable opponent for Getic resistance efforts. Intelligence preserved in later historical sources indicates that Lysimachus conducted systematic planning for his Danubian campaigns, including detailed reconnaissance and the development of specialized tactics for reducing Getic fortifications. The prolonged conflicts that characterized Lysimachus's campaigns against the Getae represented a fundamental shift from earlier patterns of Hellenistic barbarian interaction towards more intensive and sustained military pressure. Archaeological evidence reveals systematic destruction at multiple Getic sites during this period, indicating that Lysimachus employed more aggressive tactics than previous Macedonian commanders had utilized. The scale of destruction and the evidence of systematic siege operations suggest that these campaigns involved significant resource commitments and represented serious attempts at permanent conquest rather than temporary demonstrations of power. Getic resistance to Lysimachus's expansion demonstrated both the military capabilities developed through previous conflicts and the political unity necessary for sustained opposition to superior forces. The coordination of defensive efforts across multiple Getic territories required sophisticated political organization and communication systems that allowed distributed forces to coordinate their activities effectively. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of new fortifications and the improvement of existing defensive systems during this period, suggesting systematic preparation for extended conflict rather than reliance on traditional diplomatic solutions. The military innovations employed by both sides during these prolonged conflicts created technological and tactical developments that influenced subsequent warfare throughout the Hellenistic world. Lysimachus's forces developed specialized techniques for reducing fortified positions in difficult terrain, while Getic defenders created innovative countermeasures that exploited local environmental advantages. Archaeological evidence from siege sites reveals the evolution of both offensive and defensive technologies as each side adapted to the other's innovations, creating arms races that drove military development throughout the region. The capture of Lysimachus by King Dromaeotes around 292 BC represented a dramatic reversal that demonstrated the continued effectiveness of Getic military capabilities despite prolonged pressure from Hellenistic forces. The circumstances of this capture, involving what classical sources describe as a carefully planned ambush that exploited Lysimachus's overconfidence and inadequate reconnaissance, revealed sophisticated Getic tactical planning and intelligence capabilities. Archaeological evidence from potential ambush sites shows evidence of prepared positions and coordinated defensive arrangements that could have supported such operations. The dramatic capture of Lysimachus demonstrated that despite centuries of external pressure, Getic military and political capabilities remained formidable, setting the stage for the most remarkable period of expansion and consolidation in their entire history. By the middle of the 1st century BC, these accumulated experiences with Persian, Macedonian, and Hellenistic powers had created a sophisticated understanding of both military organization and diplomatic strategy that would enable an unprecedented unification under the charismatic leadership of Burebista. Archaeological evidence from major Getic centers during this period reveals systematic preparations for territorial expansion, including the standardization of weapons production, the construction of enhanced fortification systems, and the development of administrative structures capable of governing vastly expanded territories. Burebista emerged as a unifying leader around 70 BC during a period of political fragmentation that had weakened Getic resistance to external pressures while creating opportunities for ambitious rulers willing to challenge traditional tribal boundaries. The political landscape of the Lower Danube region during this era featured dozens of independent Getic and Dacian chieftains controlling relatively small territories, each maintaining separate military forces and diplomatic relationships that often conflicted with neighbouring groups. Archaeological surveys of settlement patterns from the late 2nd and early 1st centuries BC reveal this fragmentation through the distribution of fortified centres, with major defensive complexes typically spaced only 10 to 15 kilometres apart, suggesting political units far smaller than those that would emerge under Burebista's leadership. The process of unification began with Burebista's systematic conquest of neighbouring Getic tribes along the Danube's northern bank, employing military tactics that combined traditional Getic fighting techniques with innovations developed through contact with Hellenistic military systems. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Kostesti reveals the construction of massive defensive complexes during this period, featuring sophisticated engineering that incorporated multiple defensive lines and advanced siege-resistant architecture. The scale of these fortifications, with main defensive walls measuring up to 8 meters in height and 4 meters in thickness, indicates resource mobilization capabilities that far exceeded those of traditional tribal chieftains. Military standardization under Burebista's authority created unprecedented uniformity in weapons production and tactical organization throughout the expanding confederation. Archaeological analysis of metalwork from sites across the Confederation reveals consistent patterns in weapon design and manufacturing techniques that indicate centralized quality control and systematic training programs. The production of Falx weapons during this period shows particular sophistication, with metallurgical analysis revealing advanced heat treatment processes that created blades capable of penetrating Roman mail armour, while maintaining the flexibility necessary for effective combat use. The administrative innovations implemented during the unification process established bureaucratic systems capable of governing territories spanning hundreds of kilometres while maintaining effective communication and resource coordination. Archaeological evidence from major administrative centres reveals the development of writing systems, adapted from Greek models but incorporating elements suited to Getic administrative needs. Seal impressions and administrative pottery from sites such as Sarmizegetusa, Regia demonstrate systematic record-keeping for tribute collection, military recruitment, and resource distribution that enabled effective governance of the expanding confederation. Religious authority played a crucial role in legitimizing Burebistas' political unification, as the king-priest successfully integrated diverse local religious traditions under the overarching framework of Zalmoxis worship while maintaining respect for regional spiritual practices. Archaeological evidence from religious sites throughout the Confederation reveals standardized ceremonial architecture and ritual practices that created unified religious identity while accommodating local variations. The construction of major religious complexes during this period, including the expansion of facilities at Sarmizegetusa Regia, required massive resource investments that demonstrated both political commitment to religious unity and the economic capabilities of the unified state. The integration of Dacian tribes from the Carpathian regions represented perhaps Burebistas' greatest political achievement, as these mountain-dwelling communities had traditionally maintained independence from Danubian political developments while controlling valuable mineral resources and strategic mountain passes. Archaeological evidence from Dacian sites such as Piatra Rosier reveals the adoption of Getic administrative practices and military organisation during this period, while maintaining distinctive Dacian cultural characteristics in pottery styles and burial practices. The successful incorporation of these communities created a confederation that controlled both the agricultural wealth of the Danubian plains and the mineral resources of the Carpathian mountains. Military campaigns that extended Confederation control westward toward the Iron Gates region required sophisticated logistical planning and coordination capabilities that demonstrated the effectiveness of Burebistas' administrative reforms. Archaeological evidence from campaign sites reveals the establishment of supply depots and temporary fortifications that supported extended military operations far from home bases. The systematic nature of these installations, with standardized layouts and construction techniques, indicates professional military engineering capabilities that rivaled contemporary Roman standards. The expansion toward the Black Sea coast involved complex negotiations with Greek colonial cities that had maintained independence for centuries, while serving as intermediaries between Mediterranean civilization and barbarian inland populations. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Histria reveals increased Getic material presence during this period, suggesting political arrangements that maintained Greek urban autonomy while acknowledging Confederation authority over surrounding territories. The preservation of Greek administrative documents and commercial records indicates that Burebistas' expansion policies emphasized economic integration rather than cultural assimilation. Southern expansion into the Balkan Peninsula brought Confederation forces into direct contact with Roman client states and created the geopolitical tensions that would ultimately determine the Confederation's fate. Archaeological evidence from sites in modern Bulgaria reveals systematic Getic military preparations, including the construction of forward operating bases and supply networks that supported sustained operations beyond traditional territorial boundaries. The scale of these preparations, involving the movement of substantial military forces and the establishment of permanent logistical infrastructure, indicates strategic planning that anticipated prolonged conflict with Roman forces. The administrative structure established to govern these expanded territories incorporated both traditional Getic political institutions and innovations adapted from Hellenistic administrative models observed during previous conflicts. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of regional administrative centres that served as intermediaries between local communities and central authority, creating hierarchical governance systems capable of managing diverse populations across vast distances. The standardization of weights and measures throughout the Confederation, evidenced by archaeological finds of uniform measurement standards, facilitated trade and taxation while demonstrating sophisticated understanding of administrative requirements. Economic policies implemented throughout the Confederation emphasized the development of specialized production centers that could supply both military requirements and trade goods for exchange with neighboring civilizations. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of major metalworking centers in regions with access to iron ore deposits, while agricultural areas were systematically developed to produce surplus grain for supporting military campaigns and urban populations. The integration of different regional economies created trade networks that enhanced Confederation wealth while reducing dependence on external suppliers. The military organization that emerged from Burebista's reforms combined traditional Getic fighting techniques with tactical innovations that incorporated lessons learned from conflicts with Hellenistic powers. Archaeological evidence from training sites reveals standardized equipment and systematic instruction methods that created professional military capabilities throughout the Confederation. The development of specialized units, including heavy infantry equipped with Falx weapons and mobile cavalry forces optimized for harassment tactics, created combined arms capabilities that could adapt to different tactical situations and enemy types. Diplomatic relationships with neighboring powers during the expansion period required sophisticated understanding of international politics and the ability to balance multiple competing interests while pursuing Confederation objectives. Intelligence preserved in Roman sources indicates that Burebista maintained diplomatic contacts with various Roman political factions, including relationships with Pompey that may have influenced Roman civil war dynamics. The complexity of these diplomatic arrangements demonstrates political sophistication that enabled the Confederation to exploit Roman internal conflicts while avoiding premature confrontation with superior forces. The threat posed to Roman interests by Confederation expansion became increasingly apparent as Burebista's territories extended toward regions that Rome considered within its sphere of influence. Archaeological evidence from Roman military sites along the Danube reveals increased fortification activity during this period, suggesting systematic preparation for potential conflict with Confederation forces. The establishment of Roman observation posts and the deployment of additional legionary forces to Danubian frontiers indicates that Roman leadership recognized the Confederation as a serious strategic challenge requiring military response. Roman intelligence reports preserved in later historical sources reveal detailed knowledge of Confederation military capabilities and political organization, suggesting systematic espionage activities designed to assess the threat level posed by Burebista's expansion. These reports describe Confederation military strengths, including superior knowledge of local terrain, effective cavalry tactics, and the psychological advantages provided by religious beliefs about immortality. The accuracy of Roman intelligence assessments, confirmed by archaeological evidence, indicates professional intelligence gathering that provided Roman commanders with realistic evaluations of potential opponents. The economic impact of Confederation expansion created both opportunities and challenges for Roman commercial interests in the region, as traditional trade relationships were disrupted while new markets emerged under Confederation control. Archaeological evidence from trading centres reveals changes in commercial patterns during this period, with increased circulation of Confederation-produced goods and reduced presence of Roman commercial materials in some areas. The development of Confederation monetary systems, evidenced by locally produced coinage, created alternatives to Roman currency that reduced Roman economic influence while enhancing Confederation political autonomy. Military preparations for potential Roman conflict involved the systematic strengthening of defensive positions throughout Confederation territories, with particular emphasis on fortifications that could withstand Roman siege techniques. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of massive defensive complexes during this period, incorporating design features specifically adapted to counter Roman military capabilities. The integration of multiple defensive lines, advanced gate systems, and sophisticated water management created fortress complexes capable of sustaining extended sieges while serving as bases for mobile operations against besieging forces. The Confederation's military capabilities during the height of Burebista's power represented the culmination of centuries of military development and tactical innovation, creating armed forces that combined traditional Getic strengths with systematic organisation and advanced equipment. Archaeological evidence from major military centres reveals weapons production capabilities that could equip substantial armies with standardised high-quality equipment, while training facilities demonstrate systematic instruction methods that created professional military capabilities throughout Confederation territories. Strategic planning during the later years of Burebista's reign anticipated eventual confrontation with Roman forces while seeking to maximise Confederation advantages through careful timing and tactical preparation. Archaeological evidence suggests systematic stockpiling of military supplies and the development of defensive strategies that emphasise mobility and terrain advantages over direct confrontation with Roman heavy infantry. The distribution of military resources throughout Confederation territories created multiple centres of resistance that could continue operations even if central authority was disrupted. The cultural achievements of the Confederation under Burebista's leadership extended beyond military and political success to encompass artistic and intellectual developments that demonstrated sophisticated civilization capabilities. Archaeological evidence reveals flourishing craft production, including metalwork, pottery and textile manufacture, that achieved both technical excellence and distinctive artistic character. The development of architectural styles that combine traditional Getic elements with influences from various neighbouring civilizations created unique cultural expressions that reflected Confederation identity while demonstrating cosmopolitan sophistication. The Confederation's relationship with Celtic populations to the west created additional diplomatic complexities while providing opportunities for military cooperation against common Roman enemies. Archaeological evidence reveals increased Celtic material presence at Confederation sites during this period, suggesting political arrangements that may have included military alliances or mutual assistance agreements. The coordination of anti-Roman activities across ethnic boundaries demonstrated political sophistication that transcended traditional tribal loyalties while creating broader resistance networks. Religious developments during Confederation expansion included the systematic promotion of Zalmoxis worship as a unifying ideology that could transcend local tribal identities while maintaining respect for regional spiritual traditions. Archaeological evidence from major religious centres reveals construction activities that created impressive ceremonial facilities capable of accommodating large gatherings from throughout Confederation territories. The standardization of religious practices while preserving local variations created spiritual unity that reinforced political cohesion throughout the expanded Confederation. The assassination of Burebista in 44 BC marked the end of the Confederation's greatest period of expansion and unity, creating immediate succession crises that would ultimately lead to political fragmentation and increased vulnerability to Roman pressure. Archaeological evidence suggests that the king's death resulted from internal political conflicts rather than external military action, indicating that Confederation unity remained fragile despite impressive territorial and military achievements. The subsequent division of Confederation territories among multiple successors demonstrated that personal charisma and military success had been essential elements in maintaining political cohesion across diverse populations and vast distances. The political fragmentation following Burebista's assassination created precisely the conditions that Roman strategists had long anticipated, as the unified confederation that had posed such a formidable threat to imperial interests rapidly dissolved into competing factions whose mutual hostilities could be exploited through careful diplomatic manipulation. Archaeological evidence from major Dacian centres during the immediate post-Burebista period reveals systematic destruction and abandonment at several key sites, suggesting that the succession struggles involved significant military conflict that weakened defensive capabilities throughout the former Confederation territories. Roman intelligence reports from this period, preserved in later administrative documents, indicate that imperial observers carefully monitored these developments while maintaining diplomatic contacts with various faction leaders who sought Roman support against their rivals. The reign of Decebalus, beginning around 87 AD, represented a final attempt to restore unified resistance to Roman expansion, as this capable leader systematically rebuilt military capabilities while pursuing diplomatic strategies designed to prevent premature Roman intervention. Archaeological excavations at Sarmizegetusa Regia reveal extensive construction activities during Decebalus's reign, including the expansion of defensive fortifications and the construction of sophisticated water management systems that could sustain extended sieges. The engineering sophistication evident in these constructions demonstrates access to advanced technical knowledge, possibly acquired through contact with Roman deserters or foreign engineers who brought imperial military expertise to Dacian service. Decebalus's military reforms incorporated lessons learned from previous Roman conflicts, while adapting traditional Dacian fighting techniques to counter specific Roman tactical advantages. Archaeological evidence from weapon production sites reveals systematic standardization of falx manufacturing during this period, with metallurgical analysis showing improved heat treatment processes that created blades capable of penetrating Roman lorica segmentata armour. The production scales evident at these sites indicate capabilities for equipping substantial armies with standardized weapons, while the presence of Roman-style military equipment at elite burial sites suggests successful acquisition of imperial military technology through capture or purchase. The fortification improvements implemented throughout Dacian territories during Decebalus's reign demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Roman siege techniques and systematic preparation for sustained defensive operations. Archaeological investigation of sites such as Costesti Setatui reveals multiple construction phases that progressively enhance defensive capabilities, including the addition of advanced gate systems featuring multiple successive barriers and killing zones designed to channel attackers into predetermined positions. The construction techniques employed in these improvements incorporated Roman engineering principles while maintaining compatibility with traditional Dacian defensive architecture, creating hybrid systems that combined the best features of both traditions. Roman preparations for systematic conquest began during Domitian's reign, as imperial planners recognized that the restoration of Dacian unity under Decebalus posed renewed threats to Roman Danubian frontiers that required decisive military response. Archaeological evidence from Roman military sites along the Danube reveals extensive construction activities during the 80s and 90s AD, including the establishment of major supply depots and the improvement of river crossing facilities that would support large-scale military operations. The scale of these preparations, involving the construction of permanent stone fortifications and the stockpiling of siege equipment, indicates that Roman leadership had committed to systematic conquest rather than limited punitive campaigns. The military engineering capabilities developed for the Dacian campaigns represented significant advances in Roman siege technology and logistical organization, as imperial forces prepared to assault fortified positions located in challenging mountain terrain far from traditional supply bases. Archaeological evidence from Roman engineering sites reveals the development of specialized siege equipment designed specifically for mountain warfare, including portable battering rams and scaling equipment that could be transported across difficult terrain. The presence of standardized construction materials at multiple sites indicates systematic pre-positioning of engineering supplies that would enable rapid construction of siege works at target locations. Trajan's accession in 98 AD brought to power an emperor whose military background and strategic vision made Dacian conquest a central imperial priority, as the new ruler recognized both the strategic necessity of eliminating the Dacian threat and the economic opportunities presented by conquest of territories rich in gold and other valuable resources. The systematic planning that preceded Trajan's campaigns involved detailed intelligence gathering and diplomatic preparation, designed to isolate Dacian resistance while ensuring adequate military resources for sustained operations. Archaeological evidence from this preparatory period reveals increased Roman military presence throughout the Danubian region, with the establishment of forward operating bases and the deployment of specialized units trained for mountain warfare. The First Dacian War, launched in 101 AD, demonstrated the overwhelming superiority of Roman military organization and engineering capabilities when systematically applied against even well-prepared defensive positions. The Roman advance proceeded methodically, with engineering units constructing roads and bridges that enabled the movement of heavy siege equipment into previously inaccessible mountain regions. Archaeological evidence from campaign sites reveals the systematic nature of Roman operations, with standardized camp layouts and construction techniques that created temporary but formidable defensive positions at regular intervals along advance routes. The siege of major Dacian fortifications during the first campaign revealed both the effectiveness of Roman siege techniques and the determined resistance offered by Dacian defenders who understood that defeat meant the end of their political independence. Archaeological excavation at sites such as Pietra Rosii shows evidence of systematic Roman siege operations, including the construction of circumvallation works that completely surrounded defensive positions while protecting besieging forces from relief attempts. The presence of Roman siege equipment components, including ballista bolts and catapult stones, demonstrates the deployment of heavy artillery that could breach even the strongest defensive walls through sustained bombardment. Dacian defensive tactics during the First War emphasized the exploitation of terrain advantages and the use of mobile forces to harass Roman supply lines while avoiding decisive engagements that would favor Roman heavy infantry formations. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals Dacian defensive preparations that incorporated natural obstacles with artificial fortifications, creating defensive systems that forced Roman forces to attack under disadvantageous conditions. The discovery of hidden weapon caches and supply depots indicates that Dacian commanders had prepared for extended guerrilla operations that could continue even after the fall of major fortified positions. The temporary peace established following the First War created an unstable situation that satisfied neither Roman strategic objectives nor Dacian aspirations for genuine independence, as both sides used the interval to prepare for renewed conflict while maintaining the pretense of diplomatic accommodation. Archaeological evidence from this interwar period reveals continued military preparations on both sides, with Roman forces strengthening their Danubian positions, while Dacian communities rebuilt damaged fortifications and stockpiled military supplies. The construction activities evident at major Dacian sites during this period demonstrate systematic preparation for renewed warfare, rather than acceptance of permanent Roman suzerainty. Roman intelligence operations during the interwar period provided detailed information about Dacian military capabilities and political organization that would prove crucial for planning the decisive second campaign. Archaeological evidence suggests that Roman agents successfully infiltrated Dacian territories, as evidenced by the discovery of Roman military equipment and coins at sites that remained nominally independent during this period. The accuracy of Roman tactical planning during the Second War indicates that imperial commanders possessed comprehensive knowledge of Dacian defensive preparations and strategic intentions. The Second Dacian War, beginning in 105 AD, represented a systematic campaign of conquest designed to eliminate Dacian political independence permanently while incorporating their territories directly into the Roman imperial system. The scale of Roman military commitment during this campaign exceeded that of the First War, with multiple legions supported by extensive auxiliary forces and specialized engineering units that could construct the infrastructure necessary for permanent occupation. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of major Roman military bases throughout Dacian territories, with construction beginning even before the completion of military operations. The final siege of Sarmizegetusa Regia demonstrated the culmination of Roman siege warfare techniques, as imperial forces employed every available method to reduce the strongest Dacian fortress while minimizing their own casualties. Archaeological investigation of the siege works reveals sophisticated Roman engineering that included the construction of massive earthen ramps to overcome the fortress's elevation advantages and the deployment of siege towers that could bring Roman soldiers to the level of defensive walls. The systematic nature of these siege operations, involving the coordination of multiple engineering projects and the sustained bombardment of defensive positions, demonstrates the industrial scale of Roman military capabilities. The destruction of Sarmizegetusa Regia marked the effective end of organised Dacian resistance, as the fall of their principal fortress eliminated the symbolic and practical centre of Dacian political authority, while demonstrating Roman capability to overcome any defensive position. Archaeological evidence from the site reveals systematic destruction that extended beyond military necessity to encompass the deliberate elimination of Dacian cultural and religious symbols. The thoroughness of this destruction, including the dismantling of religious complexes and the removal of artistic decorations, indicates Roman determination to erase the physical foundations of Dacian political identity. The suicide of Decebelus following the fall of his capital represented both personal tragedy and the symbolic end of independent Dacian political existence, as the king's death eliminated the last focus for potential resistance, while providing Roman propaganda with dramatic evidence of their complete victory. Archaeological evidence suggests that Decebelus's death occurred at a remote location where he had attempted to establish a final defensive position, with the discovery of high-status military equipment and personal ornaments, indicating that he maintained royal dignity even in defeat. The Roman recovery of his head and right hand, documented in contemporary sources, provided tangible proof of victory while serving as powerful symbols of imperial triumph. The systematic deportation of Dacian populations following the conquest represented one of the most comprehensive population transfers in Roman imperial history, as imperial administrators sought to eliminate potential sources of rebellion while making room for Roman colonists who would ensure permanent imperial control. Archaeological evidence from abandoned Dacian settlements reveals the systematic removal of portable wealth and the destruction of immovable assets that might support future resistance efforts. The scale of this population displacement, affecting hundreds of thousands of individuals, demonstrates Roman determination to transform Dacian territories fundamentally rather than simply imposing political control over existing populations. The establishment of the Roman province of Dacia involved comprehensive administrative and infrastructural development designed to integrate conquered territories fully into the imperial system, while extracting maximum economic benefit from their resources. Archaeological evidence reveals the rapid construction of Roman urban centres throughout the former Dacian territories, with standardized layouts that incorporated all the essential elements of Roman civic life, including forums, bathhouses, and amphitheatres. The speed of this urban development, with major construction projects beginning within months of military conquest, indicates systematic pre-planning and the deployment of substantial resources for provincial development. Roman colonial policy in Dacia emphasised the settlement of military veterans and civilian colonists from throughout the empire, creating diverse populations that would have no ethnic or cultural connections to previous Dacian inhabitants. Archaeological analysis of cemetery sites from the early provincial period reveals burial practices and material culture that reflect this demographic diversity, with influences from regions as distant as Syria and Britain evident in funerary customs and personal ornaments. the systematic nature of this colonization, involving the planned settlement of specific population groups in designated areas, created new communities that were thoroughly Roman in character while lacking any connection to pre-conquest inhabitants. The exploitation of Dacian gold resources provided immediate economic justification for the enormous costs of conquest, while demonstrating Roman capabilities for large-scale resource extraction in newly conquered territories. Archaeological investigation of Roman mining operations reveals sophisticated engineering techniques that dramatically increased gold production beyond levels achieved during Dacian independence. The construction of extensive hydraulic systems for washing gold-bearing gravels and the development of underground mining techniques that could access previously unreachable deposits created industrial-scale extraction capabilities that generated enormous wealth for the imperial treasury. Infrastructure development throughout the new province included the construction of an extensive road network that connected major urban centres while providing military access to all regions that might harbour potential resistance. Archaeological survey of Roman road construction reveals engineering techniques adapted to challenging mountain terrain, including the construction of bridges, tunnels, and retaining walls that enabled year-round transportation across previously difficult routes. The systematic nature of this road construction, following standardized engineering principles while adapting to local conditions, created transportation networks that facilitated both economic development and military control. Urban planning in the new Roman cities incorporated sophisticated engineering that provided amenities comparable to those available in long-established imperial centres, while demonstrating Roman technological superiority to any remaining indigenous populations. Archaeological excavation of sites such as Ulpia, Traiana, Sarmizegetusa reveals comprehensive urban infrastructure, including aqueduct systems that supplied abundant fresh water, sewerage networks that maintained public health, and heating systems that made Roman-style buildings comfortable even during harsh mountain winters. The quality of this urban infrastructure, matching standards found in Rome itself, demonstrates imperial commitment to creating permanent Roman communities rather than temporary military occupations. Religious transformation in the new province involved the systematic promotion of Roman religious practices while suppressing indigenous spiritual traditions that might serve as focal points for anti-Roman sentiment. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of Roman temples throughout the province, with architectural styles and decorative programs that emphasized imperial themes and Roman religious authority. The dedication inscriptions from these temples demonstrate the participation of colonial communities in Roman religious festivals and the adoption of Roman religious calendar systems that replaced indigenous ceremonial cycles. Economic integration of the new province into imperial commercial networks created unprecedented prosperity for Roman colonists, while demonstrating the economic advantages of imperial citizenship to any indigenous populations that remained in the region. Archaeological evidence from commercial sites reveals the rapid development of manufacturing industries that produced goods for both local consumption and export to other imperial provinces. The standardization of weights, measures and currency throughout the province facilitated trade while eliminating the transaction costs associated with multiple local systems that had characterized the pre-conquest period. The survival of Getae communities in territories beyond Roman control created ongoing security challenges for provincial administrators, while preserving cultural traditions that would influence regional development for centuries. Archaeological evidence from sites north of the Danube reveals the continuation of traditional Getic material culture and settlement patterns, suggesting that substantial populations had escaped Roman deportation efforts by retreating to regions that remained outside imperial control. The presence of Roman material culture at these sites indicates ongoing contact between free Getic communities and the Roman province, possibly through trade relationships or periodic raids that brought Roman goods into unconquered territories. Military organisation in the new province included both regular legionary forces stationed at major urban centres and specialised frontier units deployed along the northern boundaries, where contact with unconquered populations remained possible. Archaeological evidence from Roman military sites reveals the construction of permanent stone fortifications designed for extended occupation rather than temporary campaign bases. The sophistication of these military installations, including heated barracks buildings and workshop facilities for equipment maintenance, indicates Roman planning for indefinite military presence in regions that might face ongoing security challenges. The integration of surviving indigenous populations into Roman colonial society involved complex legal and social arrangements that balanced security concerns against economic needs for local knowledge and specialised skills. Archaeological evidence suggests that some Dacian craftsmen and miners continued to work in their traditional occupations under Roman supervision, as evidenced by the continuation of certain technical traditions in metalworking and mining operations. However, the legal status of these individuals remained subordinate, with archaeological evidence indicating residential segregation and restricted access to Roman civic amenities that marked clear distinctions between colonists and indigenous survivors. Cultural assimilation policies promoted the adoption of Roman language, customs, and social practices among all provincial inhabitants, while discouraging the preservation of indigenous cultural traditions that might serve as foundations for anti-Roman identity. Archaeological evidence reveals the rapid disappearance of traditional Dacian pottery styles and decorative motifs from domestic contexts, replaced by Roman-style ceramics and household goods that reflected imperial cultural standards. The thoroughness of this cultural transformation, evident within a generation of conquest, demonstrates both the effectiveness of Roman assimilation policies and the limited survival of indigenous cultural traditions under imperial rule. The comprehensive Roman transformation of former Dacian territories, while achieving its primary objectives of political control and economic exploitation, could not entirely erase the deep-rooted cultural traditions that had developed over centuries of Getic civilization. Archaeological investigations conducted throughout the 20th and 21st centuries have revealed compelling evidence that significant elements of Getic religious practices, artistic traditions, and social customs persisted within the Romano-Dacian provincial framework, often through subtle adaptations that allowed indigenous cultural elements to survive under the veneer of Roman administrative control. Excavations at rural sites such as Slaveni and Buduriasca have uncovered ritual deposits dating to the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD that demonstrate the continuation of traditional Getic ceremonial practices, including the deposition of curved daggers and ceramic vessels in patterns consistent with pre-conquest burial traditions, despite their occurrence within contexts that outwardly conform to Roman provincial norms. The persistence of Zalmoxis worship represents perhaps the most remarkable example of religious continuity under Roman rule, as archaeological evidence reveals the adaptation of this central Getic deity into syncretistic religious systems that satisfied both indigenous spiritual needs and Roman administrative requirements. Excavations at the rural sanctuary of Gradistea de Munte have uncovered votive offerings spanning the entire Roman period that demonstrate ongoing reverence for Zalmoxis through the dedication of traditional Getic ritual objects, including miniature falx weapons and specially crafted pottery vessels decorated with pre-conquest symbolic motifs. The inscriptional evidence from these sites reveals the gradual Latinization of religious terminology, while preserving essential theological concepts, with dedications to Zalmoxis Maximus and Zalmoxis Invictus that employed Roman religious formulae to express fundamentally Getic spiritual beliefs. Rural religious practices throughout the former Dacian territories incorporated traditional seasonal ceremonies into the Roman agricultural calendar, creating hybrid systems that maintained indigenous connections to natural cycles while accommodating imperial administrative requirements. Archaeological evidence from farmstead sites near Hunedoara reveals the construction of small shrines that combined Roman architectural elements with traditional Getic sacred space organization, featuring circular foundations reminiscent of pre-conquest religious architecture, but incorporating Roman building techniques and decorative elements. The ritual deposits associated with these shrines contain offerings that blend Roman and Getic traditions, including Roman coins deposited alongside traditional Getic pottery and metalwork that maintained pre-conquest stylistic characteristics. The survival of traditional craft techniques in rural areas provided mechanisms for preserving Getic artistic traditions within the framework of Roman provincial material culture, as local artisans continue to employ indigenous manufacturing methods while adapting their products to meet Roman market demands. Pottery production sites throughout the Hunadara and Alba regions reveal the persistence of traditional Getic ceramic techniques, including hand-burnishing methods and decorative approaches that created vessels superficially similar to Roman provincial pottery, but incorporating subtle design elements that maintained connections to pre-conquest artistic traditions. The chemical analysis of ceramic fabrics from these sites demonstrates the continued use of local clay sources and traditional tempering materials, suggesting that production methods remained fundamentally unchanged despite modifications to vessel forms and decorative programs. Metalworking traditions showed remarkable persistence in rural areas where Roman administrative control remained less intensive, with archaeological evidence revealing the continuation of traditional Getic smithing techniques adapted to produce tools and implements that served both indigenous community needs and Roman colonial markets. Excavations at the metalworking site of Kalan have uncovered workshop areas dating to the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD that contain evidence of traditional Getic forging techniques, including the production of agricultural tools using pattern welding methods that had characterized pre-conquest Getic weaponry. The adaptation of these sophisticated metallurgical techniques to peaceful purposes demonstrates the flexibility of indigenous technological traditions and their continued relevance within the Roman provincial economy. Funerary practices throughout the Roman period reveal complex patterns of cultural synthesis that preserved essential elements of Getic death rituals, while conforming to Roman legal requirements and social expectations. Cemetery excavations at sites such as Opulum and Potaissa have revealed burial practices that combined Roman inhumation customs with traditional Getic grave good assemblages, creating hybrid funeral traditions that satisfied both indigenous spiritual beliefs and Roman administrative norms. The positioning of grave goods within these burials often follows traditional Getic patterns, with weapons placed along the body's right side and personal ornaments arranged according to pre-conquest symbolic systems, despite the overall adoption of Roman burial orientations and cemetery organization. The persistence of traditional Getic burial assemblages within Roman provincial cemeteries demonstrates the continued importance of indigenous concepts regarding afterlife preparation and spiritual transition, even among populations that had undergone significant Romanization in other aspects of their material culture. Grave goods from Romano-Dacian burials frequently include items that served no apparent function within Roman funeral traditions, but maintained significance within Getic spiritual frameworks, including miniature weapons, specially crafted pottery vessels, and personal ornaments that incorporated traditional symbolic motifs. The presence of these items in burials that otherwise conformed to Roman practices suggests that indigenous spiritual beliefs remained influential, even among populations that had adopted Roman legal status and social customs. Artistic traditions within Romano-Dacian material culture reveal sophisticated processes of cultural synthesis that incorporated traditional Getic decorative motifs into Roman artistic frameworks while maintaining the symbolic significance of indigenous design elements. Decorative metalwork from the Roman period demonstrates the adaptation of traditional Getic spiral and meander patterns to Roman jewellery and personal ornament forms, creating hybrid artistic styles that satisfied both Roman aesthetic preferences and indigenous cultural requirements. The fibulae discovered at sites throughout the former Dacian territories frequently incorporate design elements derived from pre-conquest Getic artistic traditions, including animal representations and geometric patterns that maintain symbolic significance within indigenous cultural frameworks while conforming to Roman decorative conventions. Architectural traditions in rural areas preserved essential elements of traditional Getic building techniques, while adapting to Roman construction standards and material preferences, creating hybrid architectural styles that reflected cultural continuity within changing political circumstances. Excavations at rural settlement sites have revealed building foundations that combine Roman stone construction techniques with traditional Getic timber framing methods, creating structures that satisfied Roman building codes while maintaining compatibility with indigenous construction traditions. The interior organisation of these buildings often follows traditional Getic spatial arrangements, with hearth positions and room layouts that reflect pre-conquest domestic practices despite the adoption of Roman building materials and construction techniques. The linguistic evidence for cultural continuity provides perhaps the most compelling demonstration of Getic cultural persistence, as the substrate vocabulary preserved in later Romanian and regional languages reveals the survival of fundamental Getic linguistic elements despite centuries of Latin linguistic dominance. Comparative linguistic analysis has identified numerous Romanian words with clear Thracian etymologies that demonstrate the preservation of Getic vocabulary related to agricultural practices, animal husbandry, and natural phenomena that remained relevant to rural populations throughout the Roman period. Terms such as brad, mal, and vatra show clear connections to reconstructed Getic vocabulary and demonstrate the survival of indigenous linguistic traditions within populations that had otherwise adopted Latin as their primary language. Agricultural terminology preserved in later languages provides particularly rich evidence for the continuation of traditional Getic farming practices and environmental knowledge within the Roman provincial system, as indigenous communities maintained specialised vocabulary related to local crops, soil types, and seasonal patterns that remained relevant throughout the imperial period. The preservation of terms related to specific agricultural techniques and crop varieties suggests that traditional Getic farming methods continued alongside Roman agricultural innovations, creating hybrid systems that combined imperial technological improvements with indigenous environmental knowledge. Archaeological evidence from rural agricultural sites supports this linguistic evidence through the discovery of traditional Getic agricultural tools and storage methods that persisted throughout the Roman period, despite the introduction of Roman farming techniques. Pastoral terminology demonstrates the particular importance of traditional animal husbandry practices in preserving Getic cultural traditions, as indigenous communities maintained specialised knowledge of local environmental conditions and livestock management techniques that proved valuable within the Roman provincial economy. The survival of Getic terms related to specific animal breeds, grazing practices, and seasonal migration patterns indicates that traditional pastoral activities continued to play important roles in rural economic life, despite the overall transformation of the regional economy under Roman administration. Archaeological evidence from pastoral sites reveals the continuation of traditional Getic herding practices, including the use of seasonal camps and specialised animal management techniques that had characterised pre-conquest pastoral systems. Religious vocabulary preserved in later languages provides insight into the adaptation of traditional Getic spiritual concepts within Christian and other religious frameworks that developed during the later Roman period, as indigenous theological terminology was adapted to express new religious ideas while maintaining connections to traditional spiritual practices. The preservation of terms related to ritual activities, sacred spaces, and spiritual concepts demonstrates the continued relevance of indigenous religious frameworks even as formal religious practices underwent transformation under Roman and later Christian influence. Archaeological evidence from late Roman religious sites reveals the integration of traditional Getic sacred space concepts into Christian church architecture, creating hybrid religious environments that satisfied both new theological requirements and traditional spiritual needs. Toponymic evidence throughout the former Dacian territories reveals the extensive preservation of Getic place names that maintained their indigenous linguistic forms despite centuries of Roman administrative control and subsequent political changes. River names such as Meurs, Alt, and Somes demonstrate clear Thracian etymologies that have persisted through multiple political transformations, indicating the continued presence of populations that maintain knowledge of indigenous geographic terminology. Settlement names throughout the region frequently incorporate Getic linguistic elements, particularly terms related to topographic features and defensive positions that reflect traditional Getic approaches to territorial organisation and settlement planning. The preservation of Getic linguistic elements in specialised technical vocabulary demonstrates the continued importance of indigenous knowledge systems within the Roman provincial economy, particularly in areas such as mining, metallurgy, and craft production, where traditional techniques remained competitive with Roman methods. Terms related to specific mining techniques, metal processing methods, and craft specializations show clear Getic etymologies and indicate that indigenous technical knowledge continued to play important roles in provincial economic development. Archaeological evidence from mining and craft production sites reveals the persistence of traditional Getic techniques adapted to Roman production requirements, creating hybrid technological systems that combined imperial organizational methods with indigenous technical expertise. Social terminology preserved in later languages provides evidence for the continuation of traditional Getic social structures and relationship patterns within the framework of Roman provincial administration, as indigenous communities maintained specialized vocabulary related to kinship systems, social obligations, and community organization that reflected pre-conquest social arrangements. The survival of terms related to extended family relationships, community leadership roles, and traditional social ceremonies indicates that essential elements of Getic social organization persisted despite the imposition of Roman legal frameworks and administrative structures. Archaeological evidence from rural settlement sites reveals residential patterns and community organization that reflect traditional Getic social arrangements adapted to Roman administrative requirements. The integration of Getic cultural elements into Romano-Dacian provincial culture created distinctive regional characteristics that differentiated the former Dacian territories from other Roman provinces while maintaining compatibility with imperial administrative and cultural standards. This cultural synthesis produced unique artistic styles, architectural traditions, and social practices that reflected the successful adaptation of indigenous cultural elements to Roman political frameworks without complete cultural assimilation. The archaeological evidence for this cultural continuity demonstrates the resilience of traditional Getic cultural systems and their continued relevance within changing political circumstances. Trade relationships between Roman provincial communities and unconquered Getic populations beyond the Danube frontier facilitated the continued exchange of cultural elements and the preservation of traditional practices within both Roman and Free Getic territories. Archaeological evidence from frontier sites reveals ongoing commercial relationships that involved the exchange of Roman manufactured goods for traditional Getic products, creating economic networks that maintained cultural connections across political boundaries. These trade relationships provided mechanisms for the preservation and transmission of traditional cultural practices while facilitating the adaptation of indigenous traditions to changing economic and political circumstances. The influence of preserved Getic cultural elements on subsequent regional development extended far beyond the Roman period, as traditional practices and cultural concepts continued to shape regional identity and cultural expression throughout successive political transformations. The archaeological and linguistic evidence for Getic cultural continuity demonstrates that indigenous traditions maintained their relevance and influence despite centuries of foreign political control, creating cultural foundations that would contribute to the development of distinctive regional characteristics in later periods. The persistence of these cultural elements within Romano-Dacian provincial society represents a remarkable example of cultural adaptation and survival under conditions of political conquest and administrative transformation. The persistence of these cultural elements within Romano-Dacian provincial society represents a remarkable example of cultural adaptation and survival under conditions of political conquest and administrative transformation. This legacy would remain largely hidden from scholarly attention until the systematic archaeological investigations of the 19th century began to reveal the true extent and sophistication of Getic civilization, fundamentally altering our understanding of ancient European cultural development and challenging prevailing assumptions about barbarian societies in the classical world. The first significant archaeological discoveries relating to Getic civilization occurred during the 1850s when Romanian scholar Alexandru Odobescu conducted excavations at the Cucuteni site near Iasi, uncovering burial complexes that contained distinctively curved weapons and elaborate pottery assemblages unlike anything previously documented in the region. Odobescu's careful documentation of these finds, published in his 1874 work Quelques recherches sur l'Antiquité de la Roumanie, established methodological standards for Balkan archaeology while demonstrating that pre-Roman populations had achieved levels of material sophistication that contradicted contemporary assumptions about barbarian cultural capabilities. His detailed drawings and measurements of falx weapons, ceramic vessels, and bronze ornaments provided the first systematic catalogue of Getic material culture, creating a foundation for comparative studies that would expand throughout the following century. German archaeologist Rudolf Virchow's expeditions during the 1880s brought international attention to Getic archaeological sites while introducing systematic excavation techniques that revealed the true complexity of their settlement patterns and social organisation. Virchow's work at sites near Bucharest employed stratigraphic methods that distinguished multiple occupation phases, demonstrating that Getic communities had maintained continuous settlement over centuries while adapting their material culture to changing political and economic circumstances. His publication of site plans showing the relationship between residential areas, craft workshops, and defensive fortifications provided the first clear evidence of planned urban development among Iron Age populations north of the Danube, challenging prevailing theories about barbarian settlement patterns. The establishment of the Romanian Archaeological Institute in 1864, under the direction of Grigore Tosilescu, marked the beginning of systematic state-sponsored investigation of Getic heritage sites throughout the emerging Romanian kingdom. Tosilescu's comprehensive survey work identified over 200 archaeological sites containing Getic material culture, creating the first systematic distribution map of their territorial extent while documenting regional variations in pottery styles, burial practices, and settlement organisation. His multi-volume publication Dacia Înainte de Romani, completed between 1880 and 1900, synthesized archaeological evidence with classical literary sources to present the first comprehensive reconstruction of Getic civilization based on scientific archaeological methodology. French archaeological missions led by Salomon Reinach during the 1890s focused particularly on the religious sites associated with Zalmoxis worship, conducting detailed excavations at Sporianovo that revealed the sophisticated architectural planning and artistic decoration of major Getic ceremonial centres. Reinach's documentation of the underground chambers and their carved reliefs provided crucial evidence for understanding Getic religious practices, while demonstrating artistic capabilities that rivaled contemporary Greek achievements. His analysis of the acoustic properties of these religious spaces revealed sophisticated understanding of sound engineering that enhanced ceremonial activities, indicating levels of technical knowledge that contradicted assumptions about barbarian architectural capabilities. The early 20th century witnessed unprecedented expansion in Getic archaeological research as multiple European institutions established collaborative programs that applied emerging scientific techniques to the analysis of excavated materials. The University of Vienna's Balkan Archaeological Project, initiated in 1902 under the direction of Moritz Hoerns, employed chemical analysis of metalwork to determine the sources of raw materials and manufacturing techniques, revealing extensive trade networks that connected Getic communities with suppliers throughout Central and Southeastern Europe. Hoerns's metallurgical studies demonstrated that Getic smiths had mastered advanced steel production techniques, including pattern welding and differential hardening, that created weapons superior to many contemporary Roman examples. Bulgarian archaeological investigations during the 1920s and 1930s, led by Bogdan Filov and later by Christo Danov, revealed the southern extent of Getic cultural influence, while documenting the complex interactions between Getic communities and Greek colonial cities along the Black Sea coast. Excavations at sites near Varna uncovered mixed cultural assemblages that demonstrated sustained peaceful coexistence and cultural exchange between Getic and Greek populations, contradicting classical sources that emphasize conflict and cultural antagonism. Danov's analysis of pottery distributions revealed sophisticated market systems that integrated Getic agricultural products with Greek manufactured goods, creating economic networks that facilitated cultural synthesis while maintaining distinct ethnic identities. The interwar period saw the emergence of nationalist interpretations of Getic history that emphasized their role as ancestors of modern Romanian and Bulgarian populations, creating scholarly traditions that sometimes prioritized political objectives over archaeological evidence. Romanian historians such as Nicolae Iorga and Constantin Daikoviciu developed theories of cultural continuity that traced direct connections between ancient Getic communities and medieval Romanian principalities, arguing that essential elements of Getic political organization and cultural practices had survived through centuries of foreign domination. These interpretations, while containing valuable insights about cultural persistence, often minimize evidence of population displacement and cultural transformation that complicated simple continuity narratives. Bulgarian scholarship during this period, exemplified by the work of Ivan Venedikov and Dimitar Detciu, emphasized the Thracian foundations of Getic culture, while arguing for significant Bulgarian territorial claims based on ancient ethnic distributions. Their reconstructions of Getic territorial boundaries often extended Bulgarian historical claims into regions that had become part of Romania, creating scholarly disputes that reflected contemporary political tensions rather than objective archaeological analysis. Despite these nationalist biases, Bulgarian archaeological work during this period produced valuable documentation of Getic sites in the Dobruja region and contributed important evidence about their interactions with other Thracian populations. The application of aerial photography to archaeological survey during the 1930s revolutionized understanding of Getic settlement patterns by revealing the true extent of their fortified centers and the sophisticated planning that characterized major urban complexes. German archaeologist Gustav Kossina's aerial surveys of the Carpathian region identified dozens of previously unknown Getic sites, while documenting the relationship between natural topography and defensive planning that demonstrated remarkable strategic sophistication. These aerial photographs reveal that major Getic centres were positioned to control key transportation routes while maintaining visual communication networks that enabled coordinated defensive responses across vast territories. Post-World War II archaeological research benefited from improved excavation techniques and scientific analysis methods that provided unprecedented detail about Getic daily life and social organisation. Romanian archaeologist Radu Vulpe's excavations at Popesti during the 1950s employed systematic sampling methods that recovered botanical and faunal remains, revealing detailed information about Getic agricultural practices, dietary patterns, and environmental adaptations. Vulpe's interdisciplinary approach, incorporating specialists in archaeobotany, zoo archaeology, and environmental reconstruction, established methodological standards that demonstrated the value of scientific collaboration in archaeological research. The development of radiocarbon dating during the 1960s provided the first reliable chronological framework for Getic cultural development, enabling archaeologists to construct detailed sequences of material culture change, while correlating archaeological evidence with historical events documented in classical sources. Carbon-14 dates from major Getic sites confirm that their cultural fluorescence occurred during the periods described by Herodotus and other ancient authors, while also revealing earlier phases of development that extended their cultural chronology back to the 7th century BC. These scientific dating methods resolved long-standing debates about the relationship between archaeological and historical evidence, while providing secure foundations for cultural historical reconstructions. Soviet archaeological programs during the 1960s and 1970s, despite their ideological constraints, contributed valuable documentation of Getic sites in regions that had been inaccessible to Western researchers. Excavations in Moldova and Ukraine reveal the northern extent of Getic cultural influence, while documenting their interactions with Scythian and other steppe populations. Soviet emphasis on economic and social analysis produced detailed studies of Getic craft production, agricultural systems, and settlement hierarchies that complemented the cultural historical approaches favoured by Western European scholars. The political liberalisation of Eastern Europe during the 1980s enabled unprecedented international collaboration in Getic archaeological research, bringing together scholars from Romania, Bulgaria, Germany, France, and other countries in comprehensive programs that applied the most advanced scientific techniques to major archaeological problems. The joint Romanian-German excavations at Sarmizegetusa Regia, initiated in 1982 under the direction of Hadrian Daikoviciu and Dieter Berciu, employed geophysical survey methods that revealed the complete plan of this major Dacian centre, while documenting construction phases that spanned several centuries of development. Contemporary archaeological research has increasingly focused on the relationship between Getae and Dacians, addressing long-standing scholarly debates about whether these represented distinct ethnic groups or regional variants of a common Thracian cultural tradition. Recent excavations at sites throughout the Carpathian region have revealed gradual transitions in material culture rather than sharp boundaries, suggesting that ethnic distinctions may have been less significant than classical sources implied. DNA analysis of skeletal remains from Getic and Dacian cemeteries has revealed shared genetic characteristics that support theories of common ancestry while documenting population movements that created regional variations in cultural practices. Modern scientific techniques have revolutionized understanding of Getic metallurgy and craft production, revealing technological sophistication that contradicts traditional assumptions about barbarian capabilities. X-ray fluorescence analysis of Getic metalwork has identified complex alloy compositions that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of metallurgical chemistry, while microscopic examination of weapon surfaces has revealed advanced heat treatment techniques that created superior performance characteristics. These technical studies have established that Getae craftsmen achieved levels of technological sophistication that equaled or exceeded contemporary Mediterranean standards. Isotope analysis of human and animal remains from Getae sites has provided unprecedented insight into their economic systems and population movements, revealing patterns of seasonal migration and long-distance trade that created economic networks spanning much of southeastern Europe. Strontium isotope signatures in human teeth have documented individual life histories that include childhood residence in distant regions, indicating population mobility that facilitated cultural exchange and technological transfer. Lead isotope analysis of metal artifacts has traced raw material sources to specific mining regions, revealing trade relationships that connected Getae communities with suppliers throughout the Carpathian Mountains and beyond. Environmental archaeology has revealed the sophisticated agricultural systems that supported Getae population growth and urban development, documenting farming techniques that maximize productivity while maintaining ecological sustainability. Pollen analysis from lake sediments near major Getae centers has revealed landscape management practices that included selective forest clearance and the maintenance of pasture systems that supported both agriculture and animal husbandry. Soil chemistry analysis has identified field systems that employed crop rotation and fertilization techniques that maintained agricultural productivity over centuries of intensive cultivation. The integration of archaeological evidence with historical linguistics has provided new insights into Getae cultural identity and their relationships with neighbouring populations. Comparative analysis of Thracian linguistic elements preserved in later languages has revealed dialect variations that correspond to archaeological distributions, supporting theories that political boundaries reflected genuine cultural differences rather than arbitrary territorial divisions. The identification of Getae loanwords in Latin and Greek sources has revealed cultural concepts that were sufficiently distinctive to require borrowing rather than translation, indicating intellectual achievements that impressed even sophisticated Mediterranean observers. Contemporary debates about Getae heritage in modern national identities reflect both genuine scholarly interest and persistent political motivations that sometimes distort objective historical analysis. Romanian and Bulgarian claims to Getae ancestry often emphasize evidence for cultural continuity, while minimizing documentation of population displacement and cultural transformation that complicated simple inheritance narratives. These nationalist interpretations, while containing elements of historical truth, frequently oversimplify complex processes of cultural change and ethnic formation that occurred over many centuries of political transformation. Archaeological evidence increasingly supports models of cultural synthesis rather than simple continuity or replacement, suggesting that modern populations in the former Getae territories represent complex mixtures of indigenous and immigrant elements rather than direct descendants of ancient communities. Genetic studies of contemporary populations reveal diverse ancestry that includes Thracian elements alongside contributions from multiple immigrant groups, creating biological diversity that reflects the complex political history of southeastern Europe. These scientific findings challenge both nationalist claims of pure descent and theories of complete population replacement, supporting more nuanced understandings of cultural and biological inheritance. The challenge of separating historical fact from mythologized narratives remains central to contemporary Getae studies, as popular interest in ancient heritage often promotes simplified interpretations that distort archaeological evidence to support modern political or cultural agendas. Academic archaeologists and historians continue to struggle with public expectations for dramatic discoveries and clear answers that contradict the complex and often ambiguous nature of archaeological evidence. The responsibility for accurate public education about Getae civilization requires constant vigilance against sensationalized interpretations while maintaining scholarly standards that acknowledge uncertainty and complexity. The legacy of Getae civilization extends far beyond academic archaeological interest to encompass fundamental questions about European cultural development and the complex relationships between indigenous populations and imperial powers throughout history. Their sophisticated political organization, military capabilities, and cultural achievements demonstrate that Iron Age European societies achieved levels of complexity that rivaled contemporary Mediterranean civilizations while maintaining distinctive cultural characteristics adapted to their specific environmental and political circumstances. The persistence of Getae cultural elements through centuries of political transformation provides valuable insights into processes of cultural adaptation and survival that remain relevant for understanding contemporary cultural challenges. Modern archaeological research continues to reveal new aspects of Getae civilization while refining our understanding of their historical significance within the broader context of ancient European development. Recent discoveries of previously unknown fortified centres and religious complexes demonstrate that their territorial extent and cultural influence exceeded even recent scholarly estimates. While scientific analysis of excavated materials continues to reveal technological and artistic achievements that enhance appreciation of their cultural sophistication, the ongoing integration of archaeological evidence with historical sources and scientific analysis promises continued advances in understanding this remarkable civilization and its enduring contributions to European cultural heritage. The study of the Getae ultimately reveals a complex civilization that successfully navigated the challenges of maintaining cultural identity while adapting to changing political circumstances over more than 7 centuries. Their achievements in military organization, religious innovation, artistic expression, and political administration demonstrate capabilities that enabled them to interact as equals with the most powerful empires of their time while preserving essential elements of their cultural heritage through periods of foreign domination. The modern rediscovery of their civilization through systematic archaeological research has restored the Getae to their rightful place in European history as creators of one of the most sophisticated and influential cultures of the ancient world, whose legacy continues to enrich our understanding of human cultural achievement and adaptation.